to shape our future.
Press on.
We came to feel the new thought.
Activate golden retriever mode.
To feel the new thought.
Activate golden retriever mode.
You're watching TBPN. It is Tuesday, April 15, 2025. We are live from the Temple of Technology, the Fortress of Finance, the capital of capital. This show starts now. We got a great show for you today, folks. We're doing a little bit of a mini deep dive on China.
That's brother behavior.
Brother behavior, lots of brother behavior going out throughout this story. The Size Gong, an homage to Chinese culture, all that they've built.
Yes.
But now, unfortunately, relationships between the U.S. and China are degrading.
Have soured.
With a trade war, and so we want to take you through it. And it starts with a very stupid question, but on this show, there's no dumb questions because we're in golden retriever mode. And that dumb question is, how did we get here? Because you learn about
Great
World
question.
War II in high school or middle school, and in World War II, I remember going to war against the Japanese, not the Chinese, and China was actually the U.S.'s ally. And then, of course, it flipped at some point. And if if you've studied history, you know exactly what's going to happen in this story. But there's a bunch of interesting anecdotes and turns and debates and a lot of different historical milestones that actually led to the relationship degrading and then building back up and then degrading again. And so I want to take you through the full ebb and flow of the U.S.-China relationship to kind of understand how did we actually get here, because we used to be partners with China. Like, we fought the Japanese with
We had
China.
a good thing going.
We had a good thing going. But obviously, the trade war has broken out. Thank God it's not a hot war, kinetic war. But it's interesting to know all the history here. And so that's what I wanted to dig through today. But first, switch your business to ramp.com. Time is money, save both. Easy to use corporate cards, bill payments, accounting, and a whole lot more. All in one place. Fantastic. Anyway, let's move on. So I've always been interested in this. How did the relationship initially sour? Of course, the history here is that during the World War II, the U.S. was allied with China's nationalists against Japan. But after 1949, the Communist Revolution created a new reality.
Yep.
And by the late 1940s, Americans viewed the loss of China to communism as a geopolitical blow amid the emerging Cold War. This set the initial tone of hostility. In October of 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Party won the Chinese Civil War, founding the People's Republic of China, PRC, in Beijing, while Chiang Kai-shek, nationalists, fled to Taiwan. So our guys in China left mainland China and went to Taiwan. That's why we're on Taiwan's side, basically.
Yep.
But it's crazy that this has been going on for 90 or 80 years now, and we're still in the, we still are guys. We still like China, but we just think of China as Taiwan.
Yeah.
And that's really the initial split there.
And
US,
China views Taiwan as China.
Yes. A little bit different, but yes. But basically, the U.S. refused to recognize the People's Republic of China, PRC, and continued to recognize the ROC in Taiwan as the legitimate government of China, which it seems like almost edgy today to be like, oh, like Taiwan is the real China. Like that's something that NBA players don't say, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense in the context of, oh, well, we were fighting the same war with this government, the nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. We were fighting with them. Then they just kind of lost their civil war and they're in exile, but they're on an island that's like kind of over there. It's all the same. So we're on the same
And one thing that's
team.
unique about this dynamic is that the People's Liberation Army, the armed forces of China, serve the Communist Party.
Yes.
They do not serve the country of
Yes.
China as just purely a nation. They
Yeah.
serve the party.
And in America, that would be crazy. It's like the Proud Boys serving at the pleasure of MAGA, basically.
Yeah,
Like-
that's dramatic. Or simply the Marines being on the side of the Democrats.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the
Like if
Republicans,
either of
right.
those happened, like, that would be like whoa, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a one-party system, and that's the nature.
And
of
if you have an issue with it, the army comes after you
Yeah.
and takes care of you.
And so obviously, like, the threat of communism is the defining theme of the Cold War, and the U.S. adopts a containment policy. And so this was an attempt to diplomatically isolate and economically strangle the new communist government, still very heavily driven by trade and tariffs and who does deals with who. Washington encouraged allies to shun Beijing. Americans were prohibited from travel or trade with China. There was no trade whatsoever with China, and China was kept out of the United Nations, with Taiwan holding China's UN seat. And so then alliances.
That would be frustrating if you were China.
Frustrating. Yes.
Got to give them that.
And so to contain communist China, the U.S. bolstered alliances around Asia. They did security pacts with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and support for Taiwan. So from the Chinese perspective on the mainland, they're kind of surrounded. They have this alliance with Russia going, but it's very tenuous. In the 1950s, the U.S. began providing military and economic aid to French Indochina, Vietnam, and later directly intervened in Vietnam, the Vietnam War, of course, partly aimed at curbing Chinese communist influence in Southeast Asia. Now, we go to the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The Korean War was the first bloody clash between the U.S. and the PRC. In June 1950, North Korea, backed by Stalin and later by Mao, invaded South Korea. When U.S.-led UN forces pushed north towards the Chinese border, Mao sent hundreds of thousands of Chinese people's volunteers to fight U.S./UN troops in Korea. The war was brutal, resulting in 36,000 American deaths and hundreds of thousands of Chinese casualties, and ended in a stalemate. That's why Korea is still split to this day.
And it's so wild to think of. We think of the American involvement in foreign conflicts as World War II, Korean War, Vietnam. Then you get into the Middle East.
Yep.
But thinking about the Korean War happening immediately following World War II, like there was almost little to no break. Right?
And also, I mean, people still think about the Vietnam War about Vietnam, and really, it's a battle between China and America.
Yeah.
And same with Korea in many ways. And so, and if you there's a fantastic documentary on Frontline, I think it's PBS, about the Chosin River Valley battle, the Battle of the Chosin in Korea, and it was like 20 degrees below freezing. Everyone was freezing. It's just like one of the most brutal wars ever fought, or battles in war ever fought. You should go watch it. So Mao touted that China had fought the American superpower to a standstill, reinforcing his regime's legitimacy. The U.S. came to view the PRC as a direct military adversary. So this is kind of the nadir of U.S.-China relations. Like, they're openly fighting and seeing each other as
Mao
rivals.
Was spreading fake news.
Fake
He
news.
famously said the U.S. was a quote-unquote paper tiger
No one
that
calls
could
us a
be
paper tiger.
defeated by determined revolutionary forces, a propaganda line to bolster Chinese morale despite the war's costs.
Yeah, paper tiger looks dangerous, not actually dangerous in reality. That's the whole thing with the paper tiger. But
Or more like a bioengineered.
yeah, so things continue to heat up after Korea. There's the U.S.-Taiwan Defense Pact in 1954. Soon after the Korean Armistice, the U.S. signed a mutual defense treaty with the Republic of China in Taiwan, pledging to defend Taiwan against PRC aggression. And this is kind of the foundation of like this idea that like we have Taiwan's back still to this day. It all started back then. American naval patrols in the Taiwan Strait began, effectively drawing a line that Mao's forces dared not cross. And there's still this debate about, should China be doing military exercises in the Strait, and can they go beyond this?
I believe they had little to no navy at all. Them being China, right? They've developed the navy over time, but it's certainly not. It sort of pales in comparison to the U.S. Navy. which has continued to plague them
Yeah.
in various ways.
And so throughout the 50s, the Taiwan Strait continued to be a flashpoint. The PRC bombarded the ROC-held islands near the mainland, provoking crises in 1954, 1955, and 1958. The U.S. responded with forceful warnings, even hinting at a nuclear retaliation to deter PRC invasion of Taiwan. And so this whole America trying to get China not to invade Taiwan has been going on for 70 years now. The crisis subsided with neither side fully escalating to war, total stalemate, but they reinforced Beijing's view of the U.S. as determined to block China's unification with Taiwan. And so the mainland China says, hey, those guys, they lost the war. They lost the Civil War. Historically, this was all one place. You know, it'd be like, in their view, it's like Robert E. Lee hanging out in Hawaii. And it's like, no, that's our thing. Like, get him back on our team.
That's a funny comp.
Right? It's like, I mean, I don't think that that's legitimate, but I think that's kind of how they see it. And so, there's more ideological warfare. During this revolution phase, fierce rhetoric prevailed. U.S. leaders spoke of the PRC as part of the Red Menace, and Chinese state media vilified American imperialists for encircling and threatening China. And America was kind of encircling China in the sense that, you know, you got Japan, you got Australia, you got the Philippines. There's a lot going on in that area. There was no official contact between Washington and Beijing. Instead, each sought to undermine each other. The U.S. via embargoes and support of adversaries in China, and China via sponsoring revolutionary movements in Asia.
And that's been. We should actually ask Jordan about this later on the show, but this sort of common thread between in the U.S.-China relationship is that there has never seemingly been great comms between the two leaders.
Yes.
Or really much of either. So it's like we're doing, now we're doing trade on a massive scale.
Yep.
You would think over the last, 30 years, which was relatively stable in the history of U.S.-China relations, you would think that there would be sort of more open comms. The president could call up Xi, have a conversation, work stuff out.
It's always super controversial. Like, I remember this idea that like Donald Trump would go and meet with Kim Jong-un in North Korea was like deeply controversial. But I'm genuinely pretty pro comms. I think communication is like the only thing that stops kinetic warfare often, and so it's very important to have these rivals communicating and ideally like humanizing each other and realizing that if the relationship sours enough, like both countries will suffer. But it is incredibly diplomatically controversial with all these different scenarios of like, we would like to invite you to invite us to have a call with you. Like that's something that actually
that happened
happens.
over the weekend.
That happened over the
I
weekend.
think it was Saturday.
And it's
it
like,
was like, the White House
just
has
pick up the phone and call
requested-
each other. Come on, let's just call each other. Send us a text message, get on Signal, you're fine. So in the 1960s, there's this strategic opening, the Sino-Soviet split. And so even as China remained hostile to the U.S., a rift grew between the PRC and its erstwhile ally, the Soviet Union. By the late 1950s, Mao resented Soviet policies and leadership. In 1960, the USSR withdrew advisors from China amid disputes over ideology and the direction of communist development. Tensions escalated into armed border clashes between China and the USSR in 1969. And so this gives the U.S. some leverage.
Some backstory here. So in the early 1960s, it was actually 1959 to 1961. I will say that communism was not working well in China. And so a lot of these issues, probably stemmed from the USSR basically saying like, whatever you're like isn't working because 30 million people have died of starvation in like a 2-year period. Figure it out.
And they basically told them skill issue.
Yeah.
Like, you got to keep going. You got to do more communism.
Yeah.
But
didn't learn the lesson there.
We're going to try some other stuff maybe at this point. But this split meant that by the late 1960s, Beijing saw Moscow as a greater threat than Washington, especially because of the border. Like Russia and China have a border right there. And so if conflict brews, it's really, really dangerous. So the U.S. notices this growing feud and views it as a strategic opportunity. President Nixon and his advisor, Henry Kissinger, later exploited this rift to wedge apart the communist bloc, aiming to befriend one to isolate the other. Nixon wrote of playing the China card against the USSR. Thus, as the revolution era closed, the stage was set for an unlikely thaw. China, isolated and threatened by a superpower neighbor, the Russians, and the U.S. bogged down in Vietnam and seeking an exit, both had incentives by 1970 to reconsider their relationship. And so the rapprochement starts 1971 to 1979. And there's this funny term, ping pong diplomacy, because the whole thaw of this relationship began on the ping pong table. You'll love to see it.
Many relationships.
As many deals get done, yes.
I think there's a lot of relationships of mine that
yeah.
I could improve by playing ping pong.
I completely agree. So in 1971, April, China invited the U.S. Table tennis team to Beijing during the World Championships. American athletes became the first official U.S. visitors to communist China, and their goodwill visit captured global attention. Finally, like the global populace is saying, like, oh, well, like they're getting along and they're playing ping pong. Like maybe things aren't so bad after all. Pretty cool.
It's a really wild setting to be a ping pong player, not even a pro ping pong player, because I don't think it was even then much of a maybe like a full-time thing. You were maybe doing some other stuff on the side, and you get tasked with going to communist China and being the first Americans to be welcomed into
But this is, I mean, the Olympics throughout history have been like hugely geopolitically important moments with what's that ice hockey story where the Russians come and play the United States, or, you know, all the stuff that happens in Germany. Like there's all these times when these kind of like silly sporting events act as like olive branches.
Ways to bring people together.
And
realize
say, like,
that,
hey,
maybe
we're not
blood enemies.
Exactly.
You know?
If we
maybe
can play
just
ping
like
pong with each other,
Yeah.
we can maybe do a little bit of trade. And so behind the scenes, this is what's interesting. Behind the scenes, speaking of comms, Nixon had long harbored a plan to engage China. In July of 1961, Nixon's national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, made a secret trip to Beijing to confer with Premier Zhou Enlai. This covert diplomacy paved the way for a breakthrough announcement. And the way they pulled this off was really crazy. I think he had to go to like India and then through Tibet and then into China. He couldn't go directly. No one knew he was there. And it was like this very controversial, very highly risky move, both from like a security perspective, but also just from a public perception perspective. Because of course, America's been beating this drum of like, we're enemies with China. And if you want to change that, you can't just come out all of a sudden and say, hey, actually, we're going to be friends. You have to work up to that. And if you don't have any cards to play, there's not really going to be that much support for it. So in October of 1971, a few months after Kissinger and Zhou Enlai start talking in China, the United Nations votes to seat the PRC as the legitimate representative of China, expelling Taiwan's ROC from the UN. The U.S. opposed this at the time, but did not prevent the outcome, which was kind of like, you know, horse trading a little bit. And so then in February of 1972, the next year, Nixon actually goes and visits China. And there's this incredible opera called Nixon in China by John Adams that you should definitely go see if you haven't, all about this trip and how, like, what an incredible culture clash it was and how kind of ambitious it was. It's fascinating.
I was in China in 2016.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, there was a culture crash. And that was in Shanghai, right?
Yep.
The most westernized part of China.
Yeah.
After decades of aggressive development and, you know, plenty of, you know, foreign companies setting up there, operating, et cetera. So in the 70s, visiting communist China had to have been truly, truly wild.
I mean, it's like less than 10 years after the two countries were losing tens of thousands of soldiers in direct conflict, essentially.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
very,
not to mention,
very
even in
aggressive.
2016, if wherever you went as a foreigner, you would have people taking pictures of you because it was just so foreign.
Just so foreign, yeah.
That it was like seeing a giraffe walk down, you know,
Yeah.
Melrose.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
Yeah. So Nixon goes to Beijing in 72. He becomes the first U.S. president to ever set foot in mainland China. He spent 8 days in China meeting Chairman Mao Zedong and holding talks with Zhou Enlai. This is called the week that changed the world, reflecting its strategic significance. The two Cold War adversaries begin bridging a 23-year gulf. The image of the staunch anti-communist Nixon shaking hands with Mao was iconic. You can see it there. A dramatic realignment of geopolitical relationships in the Cold War.
and imagine just the dynamic here around translation.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like trying to negotiate and repair a very damaged, you know,
Totally.
geopolitically, one of the most significant relationships, and you're having to do it all through a translator.
Yeah.
Even that dynamic is
it's crazy.
Shocking.
So there's a few things that come out of these talks. The U.S. acknowledges the one China principle, the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait maintain China is one and Taiwan is part of China, while not explicitly endorsing Beijing's sovereignty over Taiwan. And both nations expressed opposition to hegemonic ambitions in Asia, implying a common interest in containing Soviet power. So Nixon's really kind of like saying like, okay, guys, you both have a claim here. We're going to recognize both of your claims, but really, let's focus on the Russians.
Yeah.
And so,
nice spin. It's called a spin.
It's good spin. So this laid the diplomatic framework for improving ties without resolving all the differences at once. And this served both nations' interests. For China, facing a hostile Soviet Union, better relations with the U.S. offered security and access to technology, since the U.S. and the Soviet Union were in the space race, developing a lot of advanced technology. China was falling behind. As a partner, the United States could kind of backfill that where the Soviet Union wasn't. And for the U.S., aligning with China would pressure the USSR, who was the Cold War's primary foe, and help the U.S. extricate itself from Vietnam. And so Zhou Enlai said, he gave a toast, and he says, the Pacific Ocean is big enough to accommodate both China and the United States. This quote encapsulated hopes that the two great nations could coexist peacefully despite ideological differences. The next few years...
This ocean's big enough for the two of us.
It is.
It's basically what he said.
Yeah. So following Nixon's trip, Sino-American relationships warmed gradually, albeit short of formal diplomatic ties. There were high-level exchanges and people-to-people contacts. Scientific, cultural, journalistic exchanges began, ending decades of mutual isolation. The U.S. began relaxing trade restrictions on China. And so in 1973, the two governments opened liaison offices in each other's capitals, de facto. They're embassies, but they didn't call them embassies because that's like a little bit too much. They don't want to rush into anything.
Yeah.
It's all very slow.
It's like they were engaged.
Yeah.
But not
they're just
married.
dating. They're, what do they call it? It's not like cold launch, hot launch. Isn't that
soft launch?
Soft launch. They're soft launching the relationship. After Mao's health had declined, there was some political turmoil. The Cultural Revolution ends, and then Mao dies in 1976. This gave way to the rise of Deng Xiaoping, a reformist leader keen on modernizing China with foreign help. And so, a very big pivot in the politics of China at the time. This leadership change on the Chinese side made full rapprochement more feasible by the late 70s.
Yep.
And so in the early 1970s, there was a shift in dynamics. Nixon leveraged the China opening to pressure North Vietnam, which relied on Chinese and Soviet support, into peace accords. So that kind of ends the Vietnam War. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, alarmed by U.S.-Sino closeness, China-America working together, pursued calming down, like arms control agreements with the United States, and this is kind of the beginning of the end of the Cold War. And so China benefited as well. The threat of a two-front confrontation with the U.S. and the USSR eased. Like that would be the nightmare for China if they wound up fighting America and Russia at the same time. And so the culmination came at the decade's end. In September of 1978, President Jimmy Carter and China's leaders agreed to establish full diplomatic relations effective January 1st, 1979. The U.S. formally recognized the PRC and severed official ties with Taiwan. This meant the U.S. acknowledging Beijing as the sole legal government in China. After something like 30, 40 years, they say, hey, you guys won the Civil War 30 years ago. We're going to recognize that you kind of run the place. And they kind of do. So it's not that unreasonable, but
they have a little bit of size on Taiwan.
They do.
And they won.
Yeah. What is underrated is like the geographic and population is so disparate, but at this time, like in terms of technology, military, economics, Taiwan is still very dominant and doing very well and holding its own. So as part of the normalization, Washington affirmed the one China policy, recognizing the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. In return, Beijing accepted that peaceful resolution to the Taiwan question would be pursued. This was left ambiguous. So they say, hey,
Narrator.
we want to put...
It would not be pursued fully.
Yes. I mean, you could still hope for that. That's kind of what happened with Hong Kong. It was like not super violent, but it wasn't great. There were a lot of protests, but That's kind of the idea.
It's hard to see the protest.
But it doesn't seem like Taiwan wants to go that direction. But, what would be a peaceful resolution? I mean, I guess Taiwan could say, hey, we want to be part of China. We're cool. We're voting for it democratically. Like, that's the nature of democracy. You can vote to join an authoritarian country, I guess. Would be weird, though.
And I'm
not
sure
good for
I have no hard info here, but I'm sure that China has made a bunch of efforts to organically turn Taiwan to the point where they just vote to join.
That's the Hong Kong playbook. Right?
Yeah.
It's political support for pro-China, pro-mainland leadership in the government, and then eventually more and more diplomatic ties until they kind of merge. And so there was the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979 to reassure Taipei and Congress. The U.S. passed the Taiwan Relations Act in April of 1979, allowing continued commercial and cultural ties, and obligated the U.S. to help defend Taiwan. This act, while not a formal treaty with Taiwan, effectively guaranteed U.S. support, a point that Beijing grudgingly tolerated but viewed warily. And talk about
Which
a crazy...
again is a bit of a strange dynamic
It's
to be like,
such a
hey,
weird-
we've got comms, we have a relationship, but by the way,
Taiwan is part of China, but we will also defend Taiwan against
with
China.
our lives if you try to touch it.
It's kind of a weird dynamic that they're playing both sides here, but that's the only way that
geopolitical
move
finesse
forward. Yeah. So in 1979, Deng Xiaoping visits the United States, which is a groundbreaking trip for a Chinese leader. Deng charmed Americans, famously donning a 10-gallon cowboy hat at a Texas rodeo, symbolizing the new friendship. He sought U.S. investment and technology to jumpstart China's modernization. Deng declared, China needs to catch up with the modern world at the Texas rodeo. No, I don't know if he said that at the rodeo, but he said he toasted to the future of the friendship with President Carter, and he declared that there should be peace in the Pacific. These optimistic notes underscored the sense of a new chapter. Look at that photo of him wearing the 10-gallon cowboy hat.
We need 10-gallon hats.
And interestingly, Xi Jinping did something similar where he visited some farms in Iowa, I believe, when he was much younger. And there are these great cultural moments as high stakes as these relationships are. You get the feeling that like at some point, like these are just bros hanging out, like drinking.
Have you seen the picture?
Partying,
Have you seen the picture, by the way, of Xi in 1985?
No. Okay.
I'll try to
pull that
to
up.
pull
Send it to Ben. We'll throw it up. So by the late 1970s, the U.S. and China were in fact tacitly allies against Soviet expansion. They shared intelligence on Soviet military moves, and China benefited from limited U.S. technology transfers. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 further united Washington and Beijing in opposition. And so this was really the transformation of the relationship. Two decades of isolation has officially ended. And so in the 80s and 90s, we're talking about reform, more economic opening, and deepening engagement. And so under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China embarked on sweeping economic reforms in the late 70s and 80s. Moving away from Maoist autarky, Beijing welcomed foreign trade, investment, and technology. Special economic zones were set up to attract overseas capital, and millions of Chinese students were sent abroad, many to U.S. universities, to study science and management. And this was the beginning of
Check out this picture, by the way. This is Xi.
This is Xi Jinping in San Francisco?
In San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge.
Wow.
Fantastic bridge. Just smiling,
He's
having the time of his
time.
life. He forged lifelong friends on that trip to Iowa. It was an agricultural...
In another world, he stays here, gets into YC, builds a SaaS company. We'd be looking at a completely different world.
Completely different world.
The road not traveled sometimes. Yeah. Anyway. So the U.S. enthusiastically supports China's reform and opening policies. American businesses and technology poured into China, seeing vast market potential. It was a great deal for American businesses because they just have a massive new market. And this isn't even to talk about the supply chain, which we'll get into later. The U.S. government facilitated scientific and cultural exchanges. Bilateral trade exploded from a negligible amount in 1980 to tens of billions by the end of the 80s.
Popped.
By 1984, Deng could famously declare, "To get rich is glorious," reflecting China's new pragmatic embrace of wealth and markets, a quote often attributed to him. So very different from the Cultural Revolution, the communist mindset that I think people will put on China in the 70s. And so during the 80s, the U.S. and China found common cause in opposing Soviet aggression. They cooperated indirectly in conflicts like the Soviet-Afghan War. The CIA and the PLA coordinated to funnel weapons to Afghan guerrillas fighting Soviet troops. That turned out to be a bad decision, but but they were working against the Russians at the time. Of course, this all the weapons became the training ground for the Taliban. It was very bad. Anyway, it was a little bit of a
Reagan even went as far as to export them some military equipment.
Yep.
That is one of the most sacred bonds that two countries can have in many ways. It's dark, but it's true.
Yeah.
Despite his anti-communist rhetoric, Reagan was committed to further normalizing ties with Beijing.
I mean, we'll talk about Bill Clinton's perspective on China and what the internet would do to bring democracy to China, but this has been a thing since Nixon, and it continued through Reagan, is I can fix her. I'm built different. Once they see how America works, once they get a little taste of our rockets, they're gonna want to go full capitalist.
And this is interesting. In 1982, the U.S. and the PRC signed an agreement where the U.S. agreed to gradually reduce arms sales to Taiwan, which was aimed at placating China, though the U.S. kept selling defensive arms per the Taiwan Relations Act.
Yeah.
So clearly, again, they just can't. Pretty much impossible to pick a side, and everybody's just sort of kicking the can down the road on the big question. Yeah.
And so by the mid 1980s, thousands of American companies were doing business in China, and China's economy was growing at double-digit GDP increases. You love to see double-digit GDP increases, folks. And hundreds of thousands of Chinese students and scholars were studying in American institutions. So there were a lot of people-to-people bonds, of course. Both sides largely viewed the relationship as mutually beneficial. The U.S. saw a vast new market and a potential partner, while China gained access to capital and advanced knowledge. But there were some frictions. There were some ideological differences. American leaders occasionally pressed Beijing on human rights and political freedoms, a theme that continues till today. And there were trade imbalances. China's exports to the U.S. were growing faster than imports because China was still not a consumption-based economy, highly savings-driven. And so this U.S. trade deficit with China, while modest then, was beginning to draw attention. And of course, now it's like front and center. It's like the most important discussion point in the U.S.-China relationship. And then, of course, there was the Taiwan issue. Let's move on to Tiananmen Square and the butchers of Beijing. This is 1989. The booming 1980s relationship came to a sudden crisis in mid-1989. Over 1 million Chinese, led by students, gathered in Tiananmen Square calling for democratic reforms and an end to corruption. On June 3rd and 4th, 1989, China's communist leadership ordered a military crackdown. PLA troops opened fire on the protesters, killing hundreds to possibly thousands of unarmed civilians. And the world watched in horror because photos like this were disseminated in American media. And so President George H.W. Bush publicly condemned the violence and suspended military sales and high-level contacts with Beijing. Congress imposed sanctions. Chinese officials were hit with travel bans, and bilateral aid programs were frozen. Washington and its allies essentially put the U.S.-China relationship on hold. In 1992, during the U.S. presidential campaign, Bill Clinton criticized Bush for being too lenient on Beijing after the massacre. And this is what's so fascinating about the U.S.-China relationship, is that it's not strictly a left-right issue. We talk about this with Trump put tariffs on China during his first administration. Biden kept those in place. And so it's not like, oh, the Republicans are the China hawks or the Democrats are the China hawks. It's always going back and forth, ping-ponging based on what's actually happening, because that's kind of the nature of geopolitics. And so Bill Clinton accused President Bush for being too lenient on Beijing after the massacre, accusing him of coddling the butchers of Beijing. This strong remark reflected widespread American revulsion at the Chinese regime's behavior, and a sense that the U.S. should not conduct business as usual with a government that crushed peaceful protests. It's very anti-free speech. How can we do business with them if they're not embracing the most basic of what we see as human rights? Privately, Bush sought to preserve the strategic relationship. Just weeks after Tiananmen, he secretly sent Brent Snowcroft to Beijing to meet Deng, delivering a personal message that the U.S. wanted to maintain ties despite public outrage. The secret diplomacy, kept from Congress at first, showed Bush's desire to sustain the engagement framework, albeit under criticism. So the Tiananmen events chilled but did not permanently rupture U.S.-China relations. The sanctions and global opprobrium isolated Beijing for a short period, but China's importance and the underlying strategic economic interests led to gradual resumption of engagement in the early 1990s. And so at a certain point, Bush is saying, like, yes, they're violating human rights over there, but it's really far away and we're making a lot of money. So we got to stay the course. That's basically what happened. So Bill Clinton comes in and he moves from post-Tiananmen isolation back to a policy of constructive engagement with China, which again, like complete flipping from the campaign promise of like the butchers of Beijing, I'll never do business with them. And then all of a sudden he's like, well, I mean, we could probably do a little bit of business. We could probably make a little bit of money. Just a little bit of money. So Clinton initially tied China's trade status to human rights improvements.
It's an interesting dynamic. I think there was a continuous belief that if you could get China to adopt free market capitalism, that over time, the free market would guide China 100%. To a system that was, I don't know, who knows if it would ever been long-term aligned with U.S. interests. But I do believe that, everyday citizens of every country in the world don't have this sort of general, I don't want to generalize this too much, right? But like people in China don't have as much of a, the sort of geopolitical power players, want people to believe like this is like, citizen on citizen conflict, but it's really not. Yeah. Right. It's like every individual wants to, further their own life and, live in a sovereign country.
I mean, when you think of like America's Bill of Rights and like free speech, that is very much aligned with just capitalism. And so it does stand to reason that if you get a country to go full capitalism, full democracy, free speech and human rights will kind of follow. But that's not always the case. And that's where we get to this like state hybrid capitalism that's eventually developed. And so Clinton, he's channeling the art of the deal here. He's saying, hey, China, we're going to trade status to human rights improvements. Your trade status is going to be linked to human rights improvements. In 1983, he threatened to revoke China's most favored nation trade privileges. This came up on the All In show last week. If human rights didn't improve, however, by 1994, he de-linked human rights from trade, concluding that engagement was a better strategy to influence China. So he is saying, you know what? I'm not going to break off trade if you don't clean up the human rights stuff. Instead, I'm just going to focus on increasing trade. And I think that will lead to human rights improvements, it is somewhat reasonable. It didn't really play out, but to some degree it made sense. This pivot acknowledged China's rising economic weight. And so there's just a certain amount of pressure. And this is the pressure that's been building and building and building, where it's like decoupling every single year.
U.S. businesses putting pressure on the admin to say, hey, we want to be doing business there. We need to have a, actual, relationship between government to government.
Totally.
For us to confidently go and do business.
Every step that the relationship, that the trade relationship grows makes it more painful to break off. And so there's going to be more pressure. And so high level visits between US and China continue. 1997, Chinese President Jiang Zemin made a state visit to the US. And in 1998, Clinton traveled to China for a summit symbolizing the full normalization after Tiananmen. Clinton spoke to the university. They're back. But there are some security crises. The Taiwan Strait crisis happens in 1995 when Taiwan's President Lee was allowed to visit the U.S. Beijing was furious, seeing it as a U.S. breach of the One China policy. China conducted missile tests near Taiwan to intimidate the island ahead of its first democratic presidential election. Clinton responded by deploying 2 U.S. aircraft carrier groups to the vicinity in a show of resolve. The crisis subsided. Taiwan's election proceeded, but it was a very hot and tense moment. And then there was the Belgrade embassy bombing in 1995. During NATO's air war in Yugoslavia, U.S. bombs mistakenly hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 Chinese journalists and diplomats. Washington apologized profusely, calling it a tragic error due to an outdated map. Many Chinese believed it was intentional. Anti-U.S. protests erupted across China. U.S. consulates were besieged by angry protesters and angry demonstrators. The incident badly strained relations. And then there was also a lot of surveillance and spying accusations during the late 90s. There was fear of Chinese espionage, allegations of Chinese theft of U.S. nuclear secrets at Los Alamos surfaced in 1999. This
Yikes.
injected some distrust, but it didn't halt the engagement. Everyone's making too much money. And so trade overdrive begins during when China enters the World Trade Organization. This is a centerpiece of late 90s engagement. China really gets integrated into the global economy at this point. Clinton pushed for a landmark trade deal to allow China into the WTO. In 2000, he signed the U.S.-China Relations Act of 2000, granting China permanent, normal trade relations. This is the PNTR that came up on the All In show again. This paved the way for China's WTO entry in 2001. And so the U.S. believed that WTO membership would bind China to global trade rules, open China's markets to foreign goods and investment, which kind of happened, but not for social networking and tech companies, which we'll get into. And Clinton argued that by embracing China in the WTO, quote, the United States is exporting freedom by sending China a message that economic freedom can ignite demands for greater political freedom. So you get richer, and then you start saying, hey, I want some free speech. I want to yap. I want to start a podcast.
Yeah.
I got money. I can afford a Shure SM7B now. So you're not going to censor me, China.
Let me yap.
So the U.S. becomes China's key market, and China becomes the U.S.'s key manufacturing hub by the late 90s. China's export-led growth was heavily fueled by the U.S. market. China ran large trade surpluses, while Americans got low-cost goods. This is the happy meal of the late 90s.
Yep.
U.S. manufacturing sectors like textiles, toys, and electronics began to feel the impact of Chinese competition, but U.S. policy remained firmly committed to economic engagement. And so the late 90s were often described as a honeymoon period for the U.S.-China relations, aside from some hiccups. Jiang Zemin spoke of a constructive strategic partnership with the U.S., and Clinton toasted to China's peaceful rise, a term China itself later adopted. However, unresolved issues persisted. The U.S. continued pressing China on human rights. There was the treatment of Tibet. You might have remembered the Free Tibet movement that a lot of Hollywood actors were involved in. And just a general lack of democracy. China's military modernization began, albeit from a low base, which the Pentagon watched closely. In 1996, U.S. Defense Secretary William Perry raised concerns about China's missile buildup. And by 2000, a congressional Cox report warned of Chinese nuclear espionage. But despite such concerns, the two countries keep engaging with each other. So post-World Trade Organization entrance, China's economy absolutely takes off.
Yep.
It's sustained 10% annual
And
GDP
the
growth.
context here,
Yeah.
for me personally, is being born in the 90s,
Yep.
growing up at this time where U.S.-China relationships, is this honeymoon period. Trade is accelerating.
Yep.
It feels like China is opening up and modernizing. I had this dream as a young child of being an international businessman.
Yep.
Like I just had this idea of the thing to be was a guy wearing a suit with a briefcase doing international business.
Of course.
And so as I got into school, once I got to college, I still had this sort of idea that China was going to be an important market for U.S. tech,
Yeah.
which I was interested in. So I started studying Mandarin.
Yep.
I studied abroad in China.
Yeah.
Got in at effectively like a YC equivalent in China, and realized very quickly that the Chinese market, despite what was being marketed broadly, had no interest in foreign businesses being involved on the ground in China at all. And it really just, it completely, I basically slammed into a wall, and within 2 weeks realized that this is not a place that U.S. technology companies are ever going to do business.
Yeah.
But it was, I felt like I was sold a very, very different dream.
Yeah.
There was this idea on the ground, even people that were optimistic that, hey, Google's banned, but there's still tons of opportunities here.
Yeah. This was the lack of reciprocity.
Yeah.
So by the late 2000s, and especially in the 2010s, U.S. officials and business leaders accused China of failing to reciprocate the openness that it enjoyed from the West. So there were market barriers. China maintained high barriers for foreign countries in many sectors like finance, telecommunications, media, even as Chinese firms freely accessed U.S. markets. Now that's stopping, but for all of the 2000s and 2010s, any Chinese company could come here and sell DJI drones and TikTok and all sorts of stuff.
No,
This was
really a cell phone, because it was, how long did we have to go where, like you said, U.S. firms were being effectively stonewalled in China,
but no one kind of realized it. Yeah, it was rough. So foreign companies in China face joint venture requirements, equity caps, and favoritism towards state-owned enterprises. You need to set up something called a variable interest entity.
So this was interesting.
VIE?
So when I was there, there was a foreign. I was helping. I was like an intern for this foreign startup. Yeah, and there had to be like a Chinese person that was an equity holder in the company that did no work. They were not involved with the company at all. They didn't even have a board level role. It was just basically effectively a wealth transfer to someone local. And then that person was like, and the reason for that is not just the economic reason, but it's an influence thing. It's like, if you come in here and you do anything bad, this person is basically like,
they can take all the assets of the Chinese entity at any moment.
But also it puts the Chinese representative in a weird spot if the foreign firm is not acting in the interests of the party.
It's very
in
odd.
China broadly.
And then there was also intellectual property theft. The U.S. became alarmed by widespread IP theft and industrial espionage attributed to China. American firms reported being forced to transfer technology as the price of market entry. So, hey, you want to sell that car here? We got to see the blueprints, basically. And then there were state-backed hackers implicated in theft of trade secrets. In 2014,
that's such a crazy dynamic. I want to enter this market. Give us the exact playbook to...
Give us the codes to Zion. Really. In 2014, the U.S. indicted 5 Chinese military hackers for cyber espionage against U.S. corporations. And of course, there was accusations that Beijing was manipulating its currency to keep exports cheap, a stance that led the Treasury almost to label China a currency manipulator on multiple occasions, and eventually it did so briefly in 2019. There was also the lack of political reform. Like, everyone was hoping that the economic growth would help liberalize China politically, but that just did not materialize. In fact, if anything, China became more authoritarian, and Xi Jinping became essentially a dictator for life. And so the CCP had no intention of loosening its monopoly. There was no two-party system. There was no one else. And this was like a core assumption of the U.S. engagement strategy, was that, hey, we're going to take this leap of faith. We're going to bring you into the global economy, and we're going to expect that you evolve into a democracy over time, because China was on that track for a little bit, and it didn't happen.
To give China a little bit of credit, we were doing the same thing with Taiwan, of basically saying like, yeah, you're the one China. We're on your team. Let's do this together, and then simultaneously selling weapons to Taiwan. Everybody was two timing.
And so during the Obama era, this is the beginning of a tougher stance. So pivot or rebalance to Asia in 2011. The Obama administration announced a strategic pivot to Asia, devoting more diplomatic and military attention to the region. This was partially to reassure Asian allies in the face of China's growing assertiveness. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in 2011 outlined a policy in an essay titled "America's Pacific Century," calling for an increased U.S. engagement across Asia as a counterbalance to China's influence. This included stationing Marines in Australia, strengthening ties with other Asian countries, and these moves were controversial. Beijing definitely viewed them with suspicion. There were also the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a standard free trade agreement with Asia-Pacific nations, but not China. So there's a new trade deal that advantages everyone but China. The TPP aimed to set rules on labor, environment, and state-owned enterprises, implicitly pressuring China to reform if it ever wanted to join. And so they basically structured this trade deal to say, hey, you got to follow all these different things that you're not doing right now. Oh, it turns out everyone just happens to do this except for you. Why don't you come on reform, and then you can join, because it'd be great. You'd have more free trade.
So as China became more assertive territorially, especially in the South China Sea. The U.S. pushed back diplomatically. In 2010, Secretary Clinton stated the U.S. has a national interest in freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, which irked Beijing. In 2015, U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter publicly warned China to halt its island building and militarization of reefs in the South China Sea, saying the U.S. opposed turning these features into military outposts. China was basically like, we'd like some strategic islands, so we're going to make them.
Yeah.
The Pentagon began regular freedom of navigation operations near Chinese claimed areas, which I'm sure people are familiar, which is basically just, navigating boats through those areas.
Just being like, we could be here at any moment. Yeah, show of force.
So
power projection.
Yeah, the U.S. often with the EU and Japan brought cases to the World Trade Organization against Chinese practices, i.e. China's export restrictions on rare earth minerals, which they're doing again now, critical materials for high-tech products, led to a joint World Trade Organization complaint in 2012. While the U.S. won some rulings, China sometimes complied minimally or found workarounds. Annual strategic and economic dialogues were established to air grievances and press China on issues ranging from currency reform to market access. There was very little sort of progress during this time.
Yeah. They also host the Dalai Lama, which is very controversial to China. They don't love what he's pitching about universal rights. But Obama kind of frames this as this is, general strategic, like a general strategic and economic issue. By Obama's second term, U.S. rhetoric had sharpened. Officials openly talked of China as a strategic rival in certain domains, even as cooperation continued on climate change and Iran's nuclear deal. And then in 2012, 2013, this is when Xi Jinping really takes over. He becomes the general secretary in 2012 and president in 2013. And he centralized a lot of power and championed the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. They did a domestic tightening.
This
China
was basically
became more
his
authoritarian.
Make America Great Again campaign.
Yeah, basically. And so they did a military buildup. The PLA got a massive overhaul and budget increases. Dick Cheney was not super happy about this. And then Xi Jinping launched industrial policies like Made in China 2025. It's now 2025, and it seems like mission accomplished, guys.
Yeah, to some degree. Look, he was focused on semiconductors, AI, 5G.
And they're still not on the
I would
leading
argue
edge.
that they're not on the leading edge of semiconductors, although they're making great efforts. They are not, Tyler Cowen yesterday was very
they're behind on AI a
clear,
lot.
which is that they're behind on AI. The most exciting AI projects they have that are public are trained on American models.
They're doing well in smartphone manufacturing, 5G for sure, and then electric cars to an increasing extent, drones certainly. So important high-tech sectors, but not the key foundational technologies necessarily, but they're certainly working on it and investing very, very heavily.
And in 2013, China began the vast Belt and Road infrastructure project across Eurasia, extending its economic and political influence, another point of U.S. concern, seen as Beijing creating a Sinocentric order. Again, people have been very sort of concerned, afraid, annoyed, frustrated with sort of Belt and Road Initiative. But at the same time, I do want to give them a little bit of credit that the U.S. has just, aggressively done many similar things over a long period of time. Sometimes with different structures, right? The IMF and some of these sort of like more global organizations are oftentimes carrying out a lot of those efforts, but still.
And so Xi Jinping starts talking about the century of humiliation. That's from 1839 to 1949, when China was subjugated by foreign powers, vowing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And so he is arguing that China should no longer be pushed around or play second fiddle. It would reclaim its rightful place as a great power, the kingdom under heaven, the middle kingdom. This fueled a more assertive foreign policy. China became less willing to hide and bide, which was Deng Xiaoping's old mantra, to remain low profile. And so several incidents of deterring relations started to emerge in the mid-2010s. There's cyber espionage clashes. In 2015, there's a massive hack of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. I actually know someone who was in the database at that time, and all of their stuff got leaked because of this. It's kind of crazy.
And they was it made public or?
I'm not. I think it might have been made public. I'm not actually sure, but basically, if you worked for the federal government, all of your personal data was leaked to China, and this is widely attributed to Chinese actors. The U.S. accused China of hacking companies. Obama and Xi Jinping reached a 2015 accord not to conduct economic espionage in cyberspace, which helped briefly, but distrust remained high. And so there was also a standoff in the South China Sea. By 2015, 2016, China had built and militarized artificial islands with runways and missiles in disputed waters. The U.S. responded with more military
of
tests,
navigation
operations. That's right.
Procedures, I believe.
Phone ops.
Yeah.
And rallied allies to condemn these actions. And I remember there's some very viral YouTube videos about like China's artificial islands, because it's just like, how are they doing that? We don't do that. That's a crazy idea to just go and like build an island. But it makes a ton of sense. If you need to project power, you build an island, you kind of control it, and then you can put a tank or a turret or a missile or a plane on it. And so the economic dialogue starts stalling. Annual talks are yielding only incremental Chinese concessions, which frustrates U.S. negotiators. Market access for U.S. firms remain restricted. By 2016, calls grew louder in Washington that engagement had failed to change China's behavior sufficiently.
And at this point, Obama was frequently saying "please," which was he would ask China to play by the rules of the international system, warning that if it didn't, the U.S. and others would enforce those rules. Chinese leaders, meanwhile, accused the U.S. of trying to contain China's rise and not respecting China's core interests like territorial integrity, the whole big Taiwan thing. But needless to say, saying,
and so then, of course, 2016, Trump gets into office. There's the 100-Year Marathon book that's very informing of China's strategy. And Trump is way, way more aggressive in the rhetoric. He says they're stealing American jobs. He says he promises to get tough on China and demand reciprocity. And this did resonate with a lot of American voters in industrial states. And that's a big part of why he won.
The job loss, the various firms, manufacturing, companies that had basically been shut down due to not being able to be competitive with China for various reasons. That was still fresh on a lot of people's minds, right? If even, if somebody had a family business that had shut down 10 years ago and Trump gets into office and starts talking like this, that family is not forgetting that happened.
Totally.
Right?
And so, we're talking about a Chinese trade war today. It's actually trade war 2 because the first Chinese trade war happens in March of 2018. Trump announces tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese imports. And then Trump eventually widens that to 25% tariffs on about $250 billion in Chinese goods, which are industrial components, electronics, et cetera. And additional tariffs on the rest, roughly $300 billion consumer goods at 7.5%. Virtually all Chinese exports to the U.S. were hit, and the administration justified these as necessary to counter economic aggression and massive trade imbalances. So Trump has been beating this drum of economic warfare with China is happening. I'm going to lead the charge again and again and again. He's back in. He's doing it again. This should not be unexpected. And so China retaliates, placing tariffs on tens of billions of dollars of U.S. exports, targeting politically sensitive products like soybeans, agriculture goods, and autos. For example, when the U.S. levied $34 billion in tariffs, China responded with $34 billion on U.S. goods. Trump escalated, raising tariffs from 10% to 25% on $200 billion of goods. Beijing answered with its own increases. And so there's this tit-for-tat spiral that rocked global markets and stoked recession fears. By 2019, bilateral trade volumes fell, supply chains began adjusting, and companies in both countries felt pain. American farmers in particular were hit or hurt by lost exports, and Chinese manufacturers faced higher costs and uncertainty. And so now we get into
and then COVID.
Revenge. COVID. It's great.
COVID came immediately after this. There's, we won't get into COVID on this podcast.
I think it's more relevant to stick with the crackdown on Chinese tech, specifically Huawei and ZTE. So the U.S. banned government use of Huawei and ZTE products, citing espionage risks. And this was the big 5G debate. The U.S. also pressed allies with mixed success to exclude Huawei from their 5G networks, portraying it as a Trojan horse for Chinese spying. Of course, like if a 5G tower is intercepting all internet traffic, it's going to be pretty easy to spy, especially if it's unencrypted stuff. So Huawei responded with lawsuits. But this tech decoupling aimed to protect U.S. national security and technological leadership in the face of China's rapid advances. And so in 2018, the U.S. Justice Department charged Chinese intelligence officers and hackers in several cases of economic espionage, and the U.S. passed more laws to tighten scrutiny of Chinese investments, especially in tech startups. Sanctions were also imposed related to human rights. The U.S. sanctioned officials involved in Xinjiang's mass detention of Uyghurs and for undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. China angrily counter-sanctioned some U.S. lawmakers and NGOs.
And this is from the U.S. Department of State website. It says, also required of every company in China, a branch of the CCP is nested within Huawei's corporate structure. And they say Huawei has deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party and military.
Yeah.
And it's a privately held company, which
Yep.
is interesting too. So I think the American companies and politicians at this time that sounded the alarms were absolutely correct that just strategically cannot, the U.S. cannot rely on telecommunication infrastructure from a privately held company with ties to a foreign military, which is a political adversary.
And so Trump is getting much more aggressive about China in America. Simultaneously, Chinese officials are starting to use sharp rhetoric against the West, and they call this the wolf warrior diplomacy. And so the foreign minister, Wang Yi, blamed Washington for the worsening relationship, accusing it of McCarthyism. And there's some crazy wolf warrior tweets and quotes out there that are really, really aggressive. And it sounds just like Trump, but from the other perspective. It's very much like, this is a failing country, they're the worst. It's very funny. And so, of course, there's a lot of propaganda and conspiracies around COVID-19. Obviously, that sours the relationship, but most people are super familiar with this. And so in 2020, in July, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered a speech at the Nixon Library titled Communist China and the Free World's Future. He bluntly stated, the old paradigm of blind engagement with China has failed. We must not continue it. We must induce China to change. Pompeo proclaimed the era of engagement is over, citing China's unfair trade, human rights abuses, and aggression. He called on the world to join the U.S. in resisting the CCP's ambitions. This was essentially an obituary for nearly 40 years of U.S.-China policy and set the ideological groundwork for a new
But also
Cold
not
War
the first time that communication had entirely broken down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This happened after Tiananmen Square. And anyways, this story is still unfolding.
And it kind of brings us up to today. I mean, obviously, Biden kept a lot of pressure on China, and now Trump has escalated things to what feels like 11. But we have three great guests today breaking down various aspects of the U.S.-China relationship, what's going on in Taiwan, but we're starting with a more optimistic take on how to support Taiwan with a satellite that will provide internet. And so we are joined by the founder and CEO of Astranis, and welcome to the show, John. How you doing?
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's great.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.
Congratulations on the announcement. Would you mind just giving us the high-level announcement and even just like a little breakdown of Astranis and how you describe the company on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, of course. So today we had this very cool announcement. You go check it out on Bloomberg and some other places. We announced a new satellite for Taiwan, and this is a special kind of dedicated satellite in a high orbit that is called geostationary orbit. So this is a very special orbit. It's been around for, been around since the beginning of the space age, but essentially allows you to park a satellite over a country or a region of the world and provide continuous service with just that one satellite. Or, wait, what the hell?
Oops. You look and sound good to us.
Sorry, my something glitched on my Zoom, but it's all good. You guys can hear me?
All good. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So you can provide this service with just one satellite, or in some cases, a couple of satellites parked up there, and essentially create this backbone in the sky.
Yeah.
And this is really important in a case like Taiwan, which I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah.
Sure. Can you give us a little history of the company? And because I know you launched satellites before, and I've heard about Alaska and a few other countries. What has the rollout been now that you're kind of in the commercialization stage of the company?
Yeah. So we started the company coming up on 9 years ago.
An overnight success.
Overnight success.
We love an overnight success on this show. Congratulations. We love to see it. Just a quick 9-year journey. Good job.
Honestly, incredible timeline.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I appreciate that. Yes. We did. Yeah, we just sprang into being with this, beautiful manufacturing.
You just snapped your fingers,
fully
basically.
Formed. It just
fully formed.
It's just
manifested it.
Magically appeared. So we started the company actually to do this one thing, which I always like to joke. There are no pivots. We started with this exact thesis in mind, and then we just have been, grinding away, executing on that all the way through. But it is, do a next generation satellite design using all the latest small satellite technology, but in high orbits, which have a number of benefits and a number of use cases that are they're very different from, I'm sure, what you and your viewers have heard about in low Earth orbit. So constellations like Starlink and OneWeb and some others that are in low Earth orbit have a lot of advantages, and high orbits have their advantages as well, and that's for both commercial and military and defense applications, which we are also now charging ahead on. So we started the company, on some early commercial customers that we found, and now, fast forward today, we've signed contracts for more than 10 of these satellites commercially. We also have a number of U.S. government defense programs that are sort of in work as we speak. So there's a lot going on. But this was an important one for us. Yeah.
Can you talk about your neighbors in geostationary orbit? I saw on your site there's $15 billion worth of these satellites being sent up every single year. So there's other people. You talk about kind of like
what else is up there? Is it like the Hubble telescope? Like how high are we talking? Higher than the ISS? Like really explain it like we're 5. Explain it like we're venture capitalists, actually.
Yes. Yeah. No, for sure. So it is about 100 times farther away than low Earth orbit. It's about 1/10 of the way to the moon. And as you said, there's about $15 billion worth of these large satellites launched to GEO and other high orbits every year. But historically, those have always been giant behemoth satellites that cost hundreds of millions on, really for the commercial side is in this like few hundred million range. And then on the military side, the satellites cost over $1 billion per satellite.
Wow.
Sometimes multiple billions per satellite. So we're talking huge satellites the size of like a double-decker London, big red London bus, that kind of size. And then they're really designed to do everything from broadband communications. This is where all broadcast satellite television has always been from, and then there's some important national security missions up there as well. And so the 15 billion is total between commercial and military. But it is a huge number. It's just like it's one of these very big industries that isn't talked about a lot. And so we said, hey, there's nobody really taking a new approach here. Feels like we could go do something really interesting and perhaps quite valuable.
And talk about today's announcement and the significance of it. I imagine this is not the kind of partnership that you started working on in Q1. It's probably something that's been in the works for a really long time. Like what it's even like the timeline to make something like this happen.
Do you have one-click checkout? Can Taiwan just go, please, just buy now?
Yes, exactly.
Buy now, pay later.
No, for sure. It is a longer sales cycle for $100 million plus deal, but obviously worth the effort. This is a commercial contract with a telco called Chunghwa Telecom. It's the largest telco in Taiwan. They have about a $30 billion market cap, 7 or 8 billion a year in annual revenue. So this is a big country, big company, right? It's like in that Fortune 500 class of company. And they, among other things, in addition to managing, operating the cell tower networks for Taiwan, they also manage the undersea cables for Taiwan. They also manage satellite connectivity for the government of Taiwan. So they have a big footprint there, as you would expect. And so working with them, going back, I don't know, at least a year, maybe closer to 18 months ago, on where this could be, this valuable asset for them. And then, sort of going through I would call it all the normal enterprise sales activities from there, right? You have to get together with our technical teams, with their technical teams, hash out exactly what the technical specifics are of the satellite and then the network around it. And then, of course, hammering out the business terms. So it is a big deal for us. And I think a big deal for Taiwan. This is something they very badly need, as I'm sure you guys, as I'm sure has not escaped your attention.
What does it actually take to get the satellite up to geostationary orbit? Assuming you guys are partnered with, SpaceX on the transport side, but what are all the different kind of
this
steps?
uniquely unlocked by SpaceX in dropping launch costs? I'd love to know kind of the general trend in mass to orbit and how that's enabling the business.
Oh, 100%. Yes. I mean, there's no question. When SpaceX came along and really dropped the launch costs in a big way with the Falcon 9, that enabled a whole array of just like new space opportunity. Most, we've seen, like I said, we've seen most of that in low Earth orbit, but absolutely still the case for us in high Earth orbit. I think the difference is it's a lot higher Earth orbit. The higher orbits, it's a lot harder to get to. So you have to have your own onboard propulsion. The rocket doesn't actually get you all the way there.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. So in low Earth orbit, the rocket just drops you off where you want to be, and you deploy satellites. And there's satellites in low Earth orbit that have no propulsion, extra propulsion on board at all. They don't need it. We are quite the opposite. So you get dropped off in this transfer orbit, but it's really on us and any other satellite that goes to GEO to do the rest of the propulsion ourselves and get ourselves the rest of the way up to GEO. So that is where we had to really design the whole satellite system around this electric propulsion system. We use an ion thruster, very high performance, that allows us to, essentially have all the fuel on board that we need in the size of a couple tanks that are basically look like, a couple of scuba tanks, right? So it's like that size of tank, that much xenon gas, which is the propellant, and we can actually get all the rest of the way there up to GEO. So, between that and if there's sort of more recent technologies, I think what we're doing today just wouldn't have even been possible technically until, coming around the time we started the company 8-9 years ago, because you really had a few of these pieces coming together, including the electric propulsion. So it is a more challenging orbit to get to for sure.
Interesting. How did you get into this? I actually don't know your background before you started the company.
I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm a space guy. I've been a space guy since I was a kid. Did my degrees in aerospace engineering. Worked on some big satellite programs. Worked at a couple of the big defense contractors, which I will remain remain nameless for this, but suffice to say, learned that was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was working at the big defense primes and seeing how they operate. I think there's also there's something there that we got to fix. We got to fix for the country, or we're going to be in serious trouble. So no better way to do that than starting your own company.
Yeah, we talked to Ian Cinnamon over at Apex Space, and he was talking about building a satellite bus or a platform for low Earth orbit satellites, kind of almost acting as like a supply chain partner to speed up, delivery to low Earth orbit, like smaller companies that want to get going. You started the company so long ago. I imagine that thruster is in-house. You built all this. Are there any other partners other than SpaceX that have been helpful to you as you've built out, or what does the modern space economy and landscape of partners look like as someone's building a company like Astronis?
Oh, that's a great question. So true, a lot of these pieces were not in place when we started the company. But as these pieces come along, we absolutely take advantage of them. So that includes more rockets coming online.
Sure.
Some of them have more what we call delta V
Yep.
to get to the higher orbits. That also includes some of these transfer vehicles. So we call them, orbital transfer vehicles. So like impulse space,
Impulse. Yeah.
for example. No question as those things come online, we can take advantage of those and use that to really I mean, not to benefit us, but to benefit our customers, right?
Totally.
We can get a satellite there faster. They get faster time to market. They get the spacecraft and their service that much faster. If they if they come online and do the kinds of things that we're talking about, the orbital transfer vehicles, then we have more fuel on board, which means a longer life for the satellites. So a lot of these, there's a lot of great opportunity to come in and add pieces to the ecosystem for sure.
Are you expecting Starship to change the business? I know Starship's going to be able to dump out like way more mass in LEO, but does it also make getting to GEO easier because it's just a bigger rocket?
Well, it will. I believe it is heavily LEO optimized. So using it, we will most likely. It's not strictly necessary. We don't have to do this, but. We will most likely want to use one of these orbital transfer vehicles.
Sure.
And I think that's actually like part of the genesis of why Tom started Impulse Space was he saw this like this real need there. But it will result in lower launch costs, right? I mean, which just really benefits everyone. I think it's a huge it's going to be a huge boon to the industry, and I'm very much looking forward to it flying. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how a modern telecom company delivers internet? Because I imagine Chunghwa Telecom has cell phone towers and maybe some 5G stuff, and then also maybe now they have geo satellites and those plug into the rest of the system, or are they trying to specifically create like, we're going to sell you a separate product that's a satellite dish that will interface with this geo internet product, and it's like a completely different line. Just like, I have a Verizon plan on my iPhone. I also have a Starlink terminal for when I travel. They're two completely separate products and networks and bills. But how are the telecoms thinking about providing kind of a 360 experience to the customer?
Yeah, so for a telco, we are providing what we call trunking and backhaul, right? So trunking, exactly what you'd imagine, a giant pipe that allows them to bring, huge amounts of data from point A to point B. And then backhaul is, in their case, imagine you have cell towers out in remote areas, and those cell towers are acting like any normal cell tower, and to the end user, they don't know the difference, right? They're just their cell phone's connected to whatever cell tower they're the closest to. But if the cell tower is in a remote area, it doesn't make sense to run a fiber line to that cell tower. And so you need to do that backhaul link, that is connect that cell tower to the network through some other way. And satellites are a very advantageous way to do that, especially in certain cases. I think what we've seen with a lot of the telcos that we work with, like Chunghwa Telecom, is they really, they do see it as a very separate kind of need and product offering than what people might get at their homes with whether that be their terrestrial provider or a LEO provider like Starlink. What they are really looking for is dedicated capacity that is set aside for their exclusive use. And it's on these what we call SLAs, service level agreements, guaranteed uptimes, where they know it's there whether they are using it or not. It's just always guaranteed to be there for them. And then on top of that, you imagine you can just think about what some of these customers, Fortune 500 customers, might want in an enterprise grade offering. It's security. It's a lot of the customization. So understanding exactly what the different endpoints of the network are, exactly what equipment is used, and getting to work with us to pick that equipment if they have a preferred vendor. for that networking equipment, and then really just having this insight and transparency into exactly what's happening on their network at any given moment. So among other things, they know where their data is going and where it's not going. They know, for example, that their citizens' internet traffic is not going up to a satellite and then landing in some other country outside of their control, where maybe they don't trust that country. They just don't know what's happening to that data. So that's where we've seen this need out in the market for a true enterprise grade offering that has this kind of all these aspects to it.
Mm-hmm. How do you think about scope creep when you're sending a $100 million satellite up into the air? Everybody in traditional software is familiar. You start building something or you start scoping something out, and you're like, oh, what if we added this button or this feature, things like that. I imagine there's a huge incentive to try to scale capabilities and offer a bunch of capabilities, but at the same time, like you kind of needed to do
every
one
ounce
or two.
matters.
Yeah, every ounce matters, and there's like one or two things that are critically important.
Totally.
For the sort of value of the product.
Totally. When the customer asks for something and they know that there's there's like $100 million contract there waiting, the sales guys always want to say yes. So you got to figure out ways to help them say yes to things without, as you said, giving into this like giving into this temptation to just like customize everything. Yeah. So we have a standard satellite design. Mm-hmm. We have a few pieces to it that are essentially modular. So you can sort of plug and play a few different things like Lego blocks for slightly different customer configurations. But that's it, right? We draw the line there, and then there's only so much that we're willing to customize the design. And you have to, at some point you have to say no, like, hey, if we were to totally customize this thing for you, it would be, the cost would balloon way beyond what you are, what you're willing to pay here. So I think that's worked well for us. We've sold, like I mentioned, a lot of satellites of this using that approach, and I think there's always ways to make it work.
Yeah, I love the meme of the
sales guy
just promised like a bunch of features, dinner. And the CTO is saying, yeah, of course we can do that.
You want it to just be able to go up and back whenever you want, for sure. No
we'll make it happen.
Yeah. You want it to land on the moon and then come right back? Obviously.
Yeah, a little bit different. I guess I don't really know in enterprise software land, but I can imagine that it happens all the time, and it's like. Sometimes they just have to put up with it, but it's a little harder to like build a totally different satellite design, but physical satellite hardware.
I totally get it.
Software features.
I totally get it. With software, it's like, okay, this engineering team is going to have to spend 2 days over the weekend, shipping this, but it just doesn't quite work the same when you're sending 9-figure payloads to space. Can you talk about security, kind of like risks in geostationary orbit versus low Earth orbit? Are you far enough away that it's like a maybe a more secure environment or less risk, or are the risks still kind of very real?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to be a little limited in what I can go into here, since I do have a security clearance. Mm-hmm. There are different threats to higher orbits and geostationary orbit than there are to low Earth orbit, and different counters to those threats. I think what I would say is that our plan is and what we're executing on is we're building many of these satellites. We're spooling up our production here in this building to build build and launch many dozens of these satellites, including. We'll have on-orbit spares. We'll have satellites that we could bring in and add to the network or replace if a satellite was lost for whatever reason. And you actually imagine, that actually is an easier problem to solve than an undersea cable, fiber optic cable being cut. That fiber optic cable is being cut. You just think about the difficulty to replace that. You have to actually get a ship to roll that out over. Hold on.
Like thousands of miles, right? Somewhat related to that, but probably something you can talk about. In terms of space junk, we hear these stories about like, oh, the ISS had to dodge some satellite debris. Is that a problem for you? Do you have systems and thrusters that can turn on if you're detecting something, or is it clear enough that it's not really an issue at this point?
No, it's true. I mean, it occasionally it's much more rare in geo than in Leo these days, but
Yeah,
the orbital, the orbital, space, like airspace, but
yeah,
space, is being actively monitored at all times by the U.S. military. They actually
sure.
do this. Your taxpayer dollars at work. They do this and broadcast to the entire world if they believe there could be a collision between two space objects. And they call it a conjunction event, and you get a conjunction warning. And on board, like we do have thrusters on board, rocket thrusters that we could use to do these evasive maneuvers and get the satellite out of the way if we really believe there was a real risk of some kind of collision there. Like I said, quite rare in geo. Certainly not unheard of, but rare for you to get one of those warnings. More common in Leo, but that is just becoming a reality in the space environment now. I mean, that's just a reality we're gonna have to all deal with.
Makes sense. Speaking of undersea cables, it's been 10 years working on this. Can you take me through what the next 10 years might look like? I know that a geostationary satellite is mostly, in the case of an island nation, mostly going to act as backhaul between cell phone towers on that country. But is there a future where instead of going through an undersea cable from an island in the Pacific to mainland America, you could actually do the backhaul in space between two geostationary or satellites? Is that something that's possible even, or I know it might not be as fast, but
Well, that is the use of this Taiwan satellite today, actually.
Oh, cool.
That we announced today.
That's right.
It will actually have a couple of different, it will be able to provide service on the island, but it will also be able to be a relay to locations off the island in the case that all their fiber lines are cut.
Wow.
And they would otherwise just be totally isolated from the outside world, right?
It seems really, really important.
That is very important. That is a very
you.
real concern. You can imagine if you were just getting your communications, piped in with these undersea cables, and then one day someone accidentally drags an anchor across, all of them. That you could end up very isolated and in fact completely unable to talk to the outside world. It's very scary.
That is very scary.
A very scary scenario for a country like that, right?
Yeah.
And there are many such countries that have these concerns now. The world is a more complicated and I would say dangerous place than it was in the past. And so this is where we have seen a significant demand for this kind of service now.
Do you have
makes sense.
Do you have any insight into how Taiwan and the Taiwanese government views civil military fusion? We've heard from Palmer Luckey that every boat that's built in China needs to be able to be built to military specs. Obviously, you're doing a commercial deal here, but how does Taiwan think about that? I feel like in America, if AT&T does a deal, the government's like, or the DoD is like, okay, cool, like, that's kind of its own thing. Taiwan might have a different positioning, but what is your take on how the Taiwan government views civil military fusion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this is a commercial deal.
Yeah,
sure, and it is one of our commercial satellites coming off our commercial production line.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is that where we've seen interest from the DoD, it is actually also for these same satellites off of that same production line. They are very interested in this dual use type of scenario where they actually get to benefit from all the private capital that we've raised. We've invested that into this production capability. So then therefore, we're using it commercially, and then if we use that same production capability to produce satellites for them, then they get a much lower price point than they would otherwise if they just like all this investment had to come in to stand up a whole new production line just for a military, a new line of military satellites. So that is where, right, that's the benefit of a dual use technology. Like they are
Yeah.
getting that benefit in a way they just wouldn't otherwise. And I think places like Taiwan, they saw the benefits from that also. They saw our U.S. military contracts. They know that we have designed something that the military is interested, not in some upgraded, super, turbocharged version of what we have today, but what we actually have today. And they're basically getting that same thing, right? So that is, maybe that's slightly a different way to look at it, but
No, that's fine.
there's definitely, we are definitely seeing a closer amount of overlap of our commercial industry and what the DoD is looking for than ever before, I think,
Yeah.
in the US, as I'm sure you guys are seeing with a lot of companies you're talking to.
For sure. I'm a big fan of the moon. I want to go to the moon. I want to be able to listen to podcasts on the moon. Are you going to be able to help with moon comms in the future?
100%, yes.
love it.
We actually, yes, we have an early NASA study contract. We're studying that for NASA. NASA is going to need everything that we have like every space service we have for Earth. We're going to need another copy of that around the moon. The moon's going to need its own GPS.
Yeah.
Moon's going to need its own comms networks, both moon to moon, lunar surface to lunar surface comms, as well as relays back to Earth. And then they're going to need all these transportation systems. I think with the moon, the most interesting story that nobody is talking about is we have a real space race with China happening as we speak, and it's very concrete. There is a series of craters on the moon that we know have water ice trapped in them, and these are permanently shadowed craters on the lunar South Pole. And it is extremely valuable real estate. Like that real estate and those mineral rights, if you want to call it that, enormously valuable, because you can use that water to create rocket fuel, which you can use to then use have the moon be this stepping stone to other places in the solar system. And whoever gets there first and really decides we're not just going to plant a flag. We're going to put down a fence,
a base. Yeah.
And we're going to say, this is our lunar property. Like whoever does that first, there's no reason to not believe they will just maintain that forever, for all time, right? I mean, it's currently totally green field. Now, if all the nations on Earth agree to not do that, which they essentially did through international treaty, I'm sure the U.S. would abide by that. But if China decides to just flout that treaty and ignore it and just go land and start grabbing territory there, it would be incredibly dumb for us to let them charge ahead with that and miss out and let them get there first. So, and this is like, I mean, China just landed a new lunar sample return mission that allows them to demonstrate all the technologies needed to essentially do human missions, do other types of missions for all the things I'm talking about. And honestly, we haven't been talking about it enough because we're sort of letting China just go out and do all these things in space without even calling attention to it. I mean, I honestly, I think our new NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, who's going to be absolutely fantastic. I suspect he will talk about it once he gets in the seat. So we've been waiting for him to get Senate confirmed. I think you'll see other folks in the space industry start to talk about it, because it's a big deal. Like we need to start getting,
serious about the moon. We got to get serious about the moon.
Do you think in some way, last question, then we'll let you go. Do you think in some way, calling this, the Space Force kind of like allowed people to not take it at, like, it doesn't, in many ways, I think the name sounds cool, but I think a lot of people didn't feel like it was a super, serious initiative, when it absolutely is something that, should be continued to be invested in massively and taken more seriously?
I think,
and I mean more like the broader social media reaction to like, great, we have a Space Force, versus no, this is absolutely a new frontier of defense and warfare, and it should be taken more seriously than ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to keep in mind the Space Force in government terms. Space Force is still very new, right? It was these things take a while to get established, and also essentially to really put forward their mandate. I also would argue that under the previous administration, things were a little muddled in exactly what their mandate would be. I think under the Trump administration, it's very clear. Their mandate is to counter the all of the activity and I would say aggression that we're seeing from China in space, and we're going to see them. I think we're going to see a lot more from Space Force in the near term here. So,
Great.
I think I think stay tuned on that, and then we will also, and I think we'll also see an increasing amount of coordination between our civil space community, NASA, and the Space Force than we had in the past. And again, that's going to go back. I take it back to what China's doing on the moon. They have no, not only do they have coordination. I mean, there's just no divisions at all between their military space, civil space, and even their commercial space. It's all just one big industry blob of activity that's we can't even draw lines there. So I think to counter that, we are going to see more cooperation there, and I think people will start taking it very seriously very soon.
Great. Well, thank you for starting the company 10 years ago, and for congratulations, congratulations on the milestone.
Yeah, kind of a right place, right time story, really. When I think about
10 years in the
10
making.
years in the making. Anyway, this is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. We'll
All right,
have
John.
you back.
Congratulations
Really
to the whole
appreciate
team.
All right.
Cheers.
Have a
Bye.
good one.
All right, we have Jordan coming on. I'll be right back.
Perfect. Jordan, when you're there, welcome to the show. We're excited to catch up, talk China. There's so much to talk about. You're in the right business. You're here at the perfect time. How you doing, Jordan? Can you hear me? Let's bring him in.
Are we on?
We're on. How you doing?
I'm pissed off, John.
What's happening?
I'm not happy.
This is you should be celebrating. This is the best time to listen to China Talk. If you're not listening to every single episode that you put out, you're falling behind. And so it's got to be just a bull market in every single stat you're tracking. No?
Except for America. Except for the
Yes.
America stat that I'm tracking, which is the only one that I care about, John. I want to win. I want to industrialize. I want a golden age for America. But what we are seeing now is 2015 Warriors era execution of how to lose a trade war.
But what about reframing it to use a metaphor? Like imagine playing like a beautiful, beautiful violin concerto on the Titanic as it sinks. Like that would be laudable, right?
Yeah, it's really
That's what
fun
China
to
Talk
play
is.
a violin until your conductor gets thrown in a van and sent to El Salvador. This is the world we're living in, John.
Oh no. Well, I mean,
Jordan, it's great to see you.
yeah, good. Yeah, good to have you back. You came on with a bang. Maybe we could set the table. Like, how have you been processing the tariffs? Have you been on a roller coaster? Has it just been black pill the whole time?
It's all the way down. It's all the way down. Look, I want to believe. I really want to believe. I was going to give him a chance. I was sitting there, January 10th. Like, look, this guy, he's got some moves. Okay, he wants to change the way R&D gets funded. He wants to bring manufacturing back. He wants to fight a trade war with China. I mean, like, sure, okay, you can. I'll put in some table stakes for that.
Yep.
But can we start with the research,
Please.
John, Jordy?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Let's
start
start
there.
with that.
Okay.
Start with the facts.
Xi Jinping would cut off his left hand for the basic research university industrial complex which America has, which no other country in the world can hold a candle to until late 2025, where every single good STEM PhD and STEM professor who can get a job anywhere decides they're fucking sick of this and doesn't want to live their life terrified that they're going to be taken away from their family and their research and all their professional opportunities because they got a fucking traffic ticket. And this is the world we're living in now. John, you went to Northwestern, right?
Northeastern,
40 visas already.
Yeah.
40 people's lives fucking ruined because Marco Rubio thinks that it's cool to pick fights with biotech and CS PhDs.
Yep.
What are we doing here?
Okay. What about? Let's go back to the initial trade war with China, led by Trump. 2019 tariffs kind of go in this tit for tat spiral. 34 billion on U.S. goods, 34 billion on Chinese goods. We were discussing it at the top of the show. Starts with 50
Those
billion.
are rookie numbers.
Then
now.
250 billion. What is your postmortem on the 2019 U.S.-China trade war?
The 2019 U.S. trade, it was kind of a wash, and you can sort of write it off because the U.S. economy was growing, and we weren't picking a trade war with every other fucking country on the planet.
But is it possible that we land in the same place, and in the next 4 years you're like, well, yeah, we can write off the first two trade wars, but the third one's the real bad one, right? Is that possible?
Here's the thing. John, Jordy, tell me about what the risk-free rate is and why it matters for capital investment.
Yes. It's very
have
high.
we done that yet? Have we done that?
We talked about the basis trade. It's not looking good.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
Joe was talking earlier with Tracy specifically about in the U.S. T-bill being potentially the greatest export that we could ever have, and I think that's an interesting positioning. Can we talk about your audience is
Deep state people.
No, I was gonna go towards
This is
people
by his own definition. He says he's Dwarkesh for the deep state. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not me making it up. This is what his words.
It's great. It's great
Lovers
branding.
of freedom and democracy.
There we
That's
go.
that's what we're encompassing. Okay.
Yeah. What's the reaction from your business audience right now? Are they still at a standstill? Is it we can't make any decision because we don't have full clarity on what the world looks like in 90 days?
Look, it's not going to be 90 days. It's going to be 4 years because this man likes to be in the headlines more than he likes literally anything else. So he is going to keep doing things that put him in the headlines. He can't take wins.
But
He
that
was
could be
handed
completely different,
such a-
right?
He was handed
yes, he was going to be in the headlines next month, but it could be because he's fighting with Rosie O'Donnell, right? And that has a way
Please.
different
Oh my
impact
God,
on the
what I
T-bill.
wouldn't do to have him pick fights with Rosie O'Donnell. That is the timeline that we should all be rooting for. We need Donald Trump. If you want to take it all out on me, I'm here. I'll be the sacrificial lamb for America's basic research ecosystem. If you want to pick a fight with a shitty podcaster. We've got a brain drain of America. We got a capital drain of America. We got a geopolitical drain of America because he wants to be buds with Putin and take over Greenland. And oh, by the way, we are selling the best chips we have to China because Jensen spent $1 million to have a burnt steak at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's like truly, we're just checking off every box of dumb thing to lose this tech war.
Yeah, we can you talk about the decision that kind of flew under the radar? Was this Friday, or I don't even know if it was yesterday at this point, but NVIDIA is allowed to export the what is it, the
H800?
The H20. So it's
H20s,
an inference chip which skirts right under the export control regulations. And Biden didn't do it because he's an idiot. And now Trump isn't doing it because he likes getting, people to pay $1 million to have dinner with him. There is no reason. NVIDIA does not need the money. It's like $2 billion of revenue. Like they will be just fine without it. But we're living in this timeline where if
Yeah.
please.
So if it's $2 billion in revenue, then it's only $2 billion of AI data center capacity, and that's not enough to build a GPT-5 level model, and so it's irrelevant. Those two things can't be the same, right?
Yes and no. I mean, it's like, okay, sure. So like, what are our like Okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath because
we
I'm
don't want
running
super
too hot now, John.
intelligence.
I'm running too hot.
Yeah. I mean, the steel man here is that you yes, you don't want them building super intelligence, GPT-7 level models, like, you know, the Project Stargate, the $500 billion data center cannot be built in China. But yeah, take $2 billion, fine tune GPT outputs. It's still going to talk about Tiananmen, and you have DeepSeek, which is basically an American model, or Manus, which is Claude, like vended into China. And that's actually, we were talking to Tyler Cowen yesterday about this. He was saying that this is a win for American hegemony because the Chinese leading models have American preferences baked into the weights at a very deep level.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking that our models are going to democratize China, I mean, that might be one or two steps too far away from me.
It would be like trying to nail Jello to a wall.
Playbook, John, is the way we kind of already are, which is sell all the chips into Malaysia, and if Chinese companies want to sort of run their cloud out of Malaysia and Singapore, then okay, and we can shut it off if and when we decide we want to shut it off. But selling chips directly into China, there's no upside to it, because you're just opening yourself up to this like whole other universe of risks of maybe these $2 billion of chips actually do end up being enough to fast follow and, you know, compete with like a totally fucked up Meta and a OpenAI who doesn't.
Don't
really
let a
hyperscaler
hyperscaler hear you say that $2 billion could ever compete with $65 billion in capex. That's ridiculous.
Can you break
we
down?
We need to spend $65 billion this year. All of them are spending
billion. Okay,
they're all spending $65 billion. Every single hyperscaler.
Let's see next quarter just what that $65 billion number is going to be looking like.
Probably higher. Probably higher.
I wish. I'd love to. I'd love
65's
to.
low. You gotta get those numbers up.
He's not AGI pilled.
He's so black pilled.
His timeline is so extended.
Yeah.
We're talking 2080 at this point.
2080.
I want to. So we covered earlier on the show the sort of venture capitalist version of the history of U.S.-China relations. So like sort of high level, you know, trying to get into the dynamic. There was a few days ago. April 11th, the U.S. told China to request a Xi-Trump call. This was reported, which is sort of a funny, you know, it's just a funny way to go about trying to get a phone call.
Yeah. This is crazy. Here's my number. I mean,
just call, right?
Just call.
I think just pick up the phone and call.
But talk about the history.
Troy, this is how you do negotiations.
But this isn't unique to Trump. Like this was the same negotiation that we saw with Reagan, Nixon, Clinton. Like the whole politics of diplomacy have always been extremely convoluted, and there's never been an era where it's been like, oh yeah, it was the Democrats that always just picked up the phone and called, or it was always the old school Republicans. It's like Trump's just repeating the playbook of the last 60 years of U.S.-China diplomacy, in my opinion.
John, have you done a video about Chen Chuisen?
No.
If not, you should.
Okay.
So he is sorry, let me get the. Yeah. Okay, so born in China, came to the U.S. to study at MIT in 1935. He got a clearance during World War II, was a part of a lot of classified work, was best buds with Vannevar Bush, part of America's missile program in the early days. 1950, McCarthy shows up and blows up this guy's life. He says, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to move back to China, and proceeds to turn into the father of China's nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile program. And this is the playbook that we're currently running now. Is we're taking all of these smart people and telling them they're not welcome here. And this is, I am so sure of it. And it's just ripping me up inside that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to see companies founded. We're going to see weapons developed by people who at a sort of hinge moment in their life, 30 some odd years old, they're thinking about where they want to build their life. They're thinking about where they want to start a family. And they see that, this country is not open to them. And it's just like we have this founder cult in Silicon Valley, right? The 10x engineer, like there are going to be a handful of people who are going to end up kind of determining the future of technology and the future of the world. And we're taking on risk, which we really don't have to.
Yeah,
by telling all these people.
So I agree with all that. That's not about communication and picking up the phone, but also China. They do have TikTok. They do have DJI. They do have Unitree. Like they have the companies already. Like it's not like they're like, oh, we haven't thought to build a competitor to Facebook or Instagram. Like they've done it successfully. Like we're in a competition now.
Exactly. We're in a competition, so we can't be fucking around anymore.
I guess,
and
yeah.
We're going to have 4 more years of fucking around. And it's just dumb. And like, I still think we're going to pull it out. Like, I still have faith. You got to believe, right?
Yeah.
But
we're going to be sitting here in 6 years being like, oh yeah, we can totally sweep that one under the rug, but this one's the real deal.
I really hope not.
We can hope.
I really hope you're right, John. I want to live in that future.
You should hope that we're right about this.
No, but talk to me. Going back to my original question.
Sorry.
Maybe it's not as exciting for you, but I think it's just interesting.
Okay.
What's up with the U.S. and China never being able to consistently have clear, direct communication between the White House and Beijing?
Yeah.
I think there's a really interesting arc of the way that the Chinese government has sort of viewed US-China interaction over the past 15 years in a way that's different for really the second half of the Cold War. So from post-World War II Stalin up until really the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. and China, the U.S. and Soviet Union weren't really talking. And then you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. People got really freaked out. And both countries realized that it actually probably behooves us to be able to interact with each other in a more straightforward way, as opposed to, finding like business people and ambassadors handing people notes because we don't have like good sort of leader to leader interactions. And then even though there were scares for the rest of the Cold War, at least there was enough of a kind of muscle memory in terms of these two countries interacting with each other that people started to get a better understanding of what strategic intentions were. So the Chinese government, I think, first off, does not price in the risk of an accident turning into something really horrific nearly as much as the Soviet Union did over the course of the Cold War. And they see that, the Biden administration and the Trump administration and the Obama administration as well, understand that this can be a scary thing. And they see it as a chit to negotiate with. So if you're not worried about planes hitting into each other, and you think you can get something out of setting up regular dialogues or calls or what have you, then you're gonna put it on one of your 5 asks. But the other thing that I think Xi's looking at when he saw what happened to Zelensky in the White House, right, is I think the willingness to assume interpersonal risk is a lot lower for that system, and they want to have stuff a little more baked out before you kind of do one of these leader to leader conversations. So whatever, they'll talk at some point. I don't know if they're going to end the trade war. I'm not really sure what the aims are, because it seems like they changed a lot over the past 2 weeks, and they'll probably keep changing. But it just hasn't really been a priority for the Chinese government, because it's a thing that they think they can squeeze us on, is just us wanting to have these conversations to,
One of the things that's repeatedly come up in our conversations is just the nature of, U.S. tech companies broadly being banned from doing business in China, everything from, Google to Meta, others. And a lot of the people that come on our show are not even allowed to travel to China because they're in anything defense, aerospace related.
Sure.
On the ground in China, do they does the government or the military, I don't even know how much of this information would ever appear online and available, do they laugh at us for allowing TikTok and DJI and Unitree? Do you think it's silly? It's like you're tariffing our cheap toys, but then you still let us sell DJI
Brain
drones.
rot.
You still let us distribute brain rot to 100. Like, is it a funny thing to them? Because to me, it's a terrible irony, and that like we just can't get a TikTok ban across the line, or we haven't been able to get them to sell it yet. And again, like these sort of industries and products that have extreme national security risk, you would think those would be the easiest things that the United States could make a sort of collective decision on that would so I'm curious what their sort of like reaction to the silliness of it all is.
Oh yeah, laughing their way to the bank. I mean, like, look, there is definitely like some trade war shit that needs to be happening. Step one, TikTok and DJI. You said it yourself, Jordy. I mean, it's like, I would love for there to be a like really wonderful globally competitive supply chain that America can create the sort of autonomous drones that Ukraine has been able to leverage, and even they still have to buy stuff from China because there's not enough there ex-China. But instead, we're kind of going in a very different direction. So yeah, I mean, you're totally right, Jordy. It's just there's not a strategic vision that we're seeing out of this political moment. And I think they're, not to put China 200 feet tall, like there's definitely things that they're going to do wrong, and their economy isn't perfect, and their sort of like techno-industrial complex is not perfect, but they figured out a lot of this manufacturing stuff.
So the one thing that's clear, very, very good at manufacturing. I don't think anybody disagrees on that. How do you judge, like, what do you look for to understand, if China was really suffering right now from these new tariffs, we wouldn't know about it, right? It would be, it's sort of like, it's not like they're going to come out and start saying, talking to the people publicly
we can see
and
in their
saying,
stock market, right?
yeah, sure. But like, there's a lot of information control in a way that's not necessarily the case. Like if a U.S. business is being affected by the tariffs, that person's going to go on LinkedIn and TikTok, or they'll come on TBPN and they'll say like, yeah, my costs are up, 300%. And
unless they're coping really hard.
Yeah.
But
how do you try to judge the actual impact of the tariffs in the domestic, the
Yeah, I see
economic
what you're
activity
saying,
on the
Jordy.
ground?
I don't think it's as opaque a system as like the CIA and different corners of the U.S. government were having these like big drawn out debates in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s about how large the Soviet economy was, because they were saying like, okay, let's say they spend 10% of GDP on defense, so like what's the base that they're doing this off? And it was really hard to figure out how big the Soviet economy is. I don't think it's that hard to figure it out today. As John said, we have trade data, we have the stock market, we
Satellites.
have quarterly earnings from all these companies, and I think there's like enough out there of like chatter of people saying like, oh shit, I got laid off because of the trade war, that like you'll be able to pick up the atmospherics just in the same way you can by having reading Joe Weisenthal's Twitter feed, right?
What about kind of the new ally ships that are building? I mean, you were very upset about like America kind of potentially frustrating trade partners like Canada, UK, Australia, France. Like we shouldn't be pushing them away. Some of that subsided. It still feels like in general, if we're going towards a more bipolar world, and you are creating some sort of broad Western alliance, like you're going to put the Five Eyes together. You're going to put NATO and America together. But who's on China's side? I've been worried about like a China, Russia, Iran coalition forming. Are there other countries that are starting to flip into Chinese allyship more seriously post trade war?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing, is like the reason that China wasn't really able to capitalize during trade war number one is because they were feeling their oats and they thought they could still do wolf warrior diplomacy and bully other countries around, even though Trump was sort of like shitting on them in their own way. And it'll be fascinating over the next few years to see whether or not they sort of learn from that experience and take a more conciliatory approach and don't try to like nickel and dime these countries in order to really potentially win them over. But Southeast Asia, like, okay, I guess like we did 76% tariffs on Vietnam and then we cut it back, but like who knows where we're gonna go with that. But
Sure.
It's two things. It's like, are we going to go to China or are we just going to cut trade deals with every other country ex the US so that we're going to, the sort of like the free world ex US is going to have this, thriving thriving trade ecosystem, which we're just not going to benefit from because those supply chains won't run through the US, or our consumers won't get to benefit from, or our exporters won't get to benefit from. Yeah. So, there are a lot of like intellectual risks here. There's the intellectual risk of like thinking China's 100 feet tall and we're shot and there's no way we can compete with these companies. But there's also the intellectual risk of thinking America is 200 feet tall and we are like, we're still only 25% of global GDP, and that's a whole lot of GDP out there, which is going to be thinking about what to, what to do and who to trade with and where to invest. And so
I have a question. What is so China blocked orders of Boeing aircraft to their national airlines. Are we going to see?
They're going to go with Gulfstream.
Yeah, that would be cool.
They prefer the G650ER.
Do you have any sense of I'm assuming that China's been aggressively trying to clone various U.S. commercial aircrafts for years. Is that as advanced as the automotive industry in China, or is it a ways behind?
Yeah, it's interesting. That one's kind of been like the final frontier. It has been a clear national priority for a very long time. And jet engines are really hard, apparently, even if you layer on industrial espionage and like an enormous amount of state support. My guess is that like the reason it has taken so long for Comac to get its shit together and build competitors to Boeing and Airbus is probably the fact that it is state owned and there are just like poor incentives going on versus the sort of free market free for all that you saw in the electric vehicle industry just attracted better talent, more capital.
Phone companies moved over into cars, and they're not doing that in planes, right?
Yeah, so I think there's, and there's like relatively limited upside. It's like a national prestige product as much as it is a a capitalist endeavor to make these jets. So we'll have to see. I mean, I'm like, look, if they can't do it, the orders will just go to Airbus, and like that sucks. But it is what it is. And I think that industry in particular, there's so much like geopolitics baked into it that I'm not shocked that was on the first list of like things to start cutting from a U.S. import perspective.
Last question. You seem pretty black-pilled. How's Dylan Patel doing? Have you done a wellness check? You seem pretty black-pilled when you talked to him a few days ago. What's his mindset like right now?
I wish him the best. I don't know. I think it's just like I thought AI would be our out. But if we're going to sell them all the chips and we're going to screw up the like American capital base that we're banking on to fund all this AI expansion, and we're going to throw away the AI diffusion rule such that like the chips are actually just going to end up going to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Brunei, then it's just we're just taking on risk left and right, and like we might be able to pull it out, but it's it's hard to watch. Thank you for letting me turn this into the Jordan Schneider therapy session.
We're gonna leave you with a white pill one way or another. What do you
Okay.
got?
Oh,
You got
I just had a
or-
question of like, where does the Middle East really sit in all of this, right? It feels like in many ways, we cover business and technology. In many ways, the relationship between the U.S. tech industry and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE is, thriving just due to the capital flows. But, how do they think about even picking? I haven't seen themselves inserting themselves into the story over the last couple weeks, and I'm sure that's for good reason. But I'm curious how you see them as a player in all this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like their diplomatic system knows how to play the kleptocracy game much better than Canada or Europe. They got their reps and sets when it comes to dealing with, family dynasties and whatnot. So they're smart to keep quiet. I think the diffusion rule that the Biden administration put out at the very end was really a play to force them to pick sides. And basically the deal was like, look, if you want access to the future, if you want access to compute, then you really got to play ball with us, and you got to play ball with our AI cloud providers and our sort of broader defense ecosystem. And if you're gonna have too much China AI in your in your national bloodstream, then we're gonna reconsider whether or not we're gonna let you buy chips and access our models and whatnot. So we'll see. This is a regulation which I think is going to be a really interesting bellwether, because it was a very clever hinge to sort of force the Middle East government and the governments and the money that came with that to invest in the Western as opposed to the Chinese technology stack. And look, if they don't love what they're seeing, maybe they'll be more excited to, if they A, don't love what they're seeing, and B, we take away the jack that we had around them, then you could see them starting to wiggle in other directions and take side bets on a pot that they may have had to have gone all in with us if it wasn't for all the craziness we've seen over the past few months.
Got it.
Very last 30-second question.
Sure.
How real do you feel the yield coming out of TSMC Arizona is, or is it marketing to the admin that, hey, we're doing what you want, and NVIDIA coming out and saying they're going to make Blackwell chips in the U.S.? It's hard to judge it's hard to understand how real it is when we know that people get excited about, we're going to produce $500 billion of Blackwell chips in the U.S. in the next 5 years, I think is what they were saying, which sounds amazing. But in this current dynamic, when there's so many different conflicts and so much on the line, it's hard to know what's marketing and what's actual, projections.
It's a good question. My rule of thumb is you can't lie to the SEC. So just wait for the filings. But look, everyone's trying to figure out how to get on this guy's good side, and maybe this is something that might work. I it's an interesting sort of policy trade-off. Would we rather have cheaper AI hardware that Microsoft and Amazon can buy? Would we rather have it be in the US? I mean, if the sort of pressure is forcing more stuff to be built in America, there are pluses and negatives from that, especially if we're doing accelerated timelines and the prices are going up. And I think this applies to TSMC as much as it does lots of other industries. So look, they're more pot committed than almost any other company in the world, and they don't really have an out for this. So they're gonna do everything they can to make Arizona work and make the relationship with this administration and this country more broadly work. But I'm almost more concerned about the other companies who don't have as much money to burn and have other options when it comes to setting up manufacturing plants and finding kind of end users to sell to that are just going to look at what they're seeing now and we can open that playbook again and see what else is what other countries and locales are on the agenda.
All right.
This
Well,
is fantastic.
fantastic
Thank you.
having
Love a
you.
spirited debate. We'll figure this out.
Long America.
We're built different. America's going to be fine. Don't worry about
Okay.
it. We got another 1,000-year reign. It's all good. Just relax. Just put out great podcasts. Cash in while you can, since China's in the news. Tell people where they can find China Talk. Give the pitch.
China.talk.
ChinaTalk.media.
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 Go to
China Talk, one word.
ChinaTalk.media.
Your favorite podcast app.
Yes.
I promise you, I'm not that negative most of the time. It's like 80-20 good vibes.
There's some great stuff on there, and we appreciate you coming by.
Golden Retriever mode.
Activate Golden Retriever mode. Be a little bit more positive and
All right, we have another guest.
White pills next.
We have another guest.
No. That is not family friendly. Get out of here. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for stopping by, Jordan.
Bye, Jordan.
This is great.
I missed that completely.
Yeah, he did a little squirt gun to the head motion.
Oh,
Not good.
Never.
Not family friendly on this show. Anyway,
I'm gonna hit the sound
we
effect
got
one
we got
more
Aaron
time.
Ginn coming in the studio. He's written some absolutely banger takes about China GPUs. He's been called the GPU whisperer, and there's a fascinating article I want him to break down for us. He wrote this in January 22nd of this year. It's time to build America's cyber nuke. We desperately need a deterrent to stop wars before they start. I want to hear him explain it. Aaron, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, doing well. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Would you just give us a little walkthrough of your background, what you do, how you got to the place you are in today?
No, that's a good question. Say like the Lord works in mysterious ways. So we actually started this project. This is my fourth company. We started this project actually as a help you leave the cloud, don't be canceled. And so what we found out is that data centers didn't have like a software stack to help them monetize customers. So they were mentioned like you're a merchant selling t-shirts, and Shopify didn't exist. And so then we started building this. And then when the GPU craze started, the data centers were like, we need something to run this stuff. And then we were there. And so we started that 4 years ago. And so like we never had the right customer in mind. But in terms of like a lot of the other stuff that happened with the space, it just had this really nice merriment of like, I've been working in public policy for over a decade as well. I have a foundation in DC, public policy think tank, and also been like doing like political stuff on the side. And then just so happens that like AI is the fastest, regulation in Silicon Valley history. And people view it as if, it's regulated under missile technology law. That's how it's regulated right now. So people in DC literally view that Jensen is selling weapons of mass destruction to other countries. And so that's why they use the word diffusion, proliferation, right? Those are nuclear weapons words. So those are, this is not like in terms of politicians, they don't view this as if, you're selling just fun little gaming gear to different countries. So that's how we got into it. And, now we're in, I think, over a dozen countries. We are in 50 data centers or something like that, doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in transactions. So we think GPUs are going to be everywhere, and kind of have reached that escape velocity. There's not really much the U.S. government can do about it at this point.
Yeah.
How did you react to the new NVIDIA deal that got announced in the last week? Another $2 billion chips to China. You think it's just?
Oh, you mean the H200? They're talking about the reshoring thing with TSMC and Foxconn. Which one?
The first part.
Oh, yeah. I think it's positive because I think that the approach that Americans have to understand is that the way that China and so like I'm a Chinese exile. My family fled communist China. We fought for the KMT, and during the Cultural Revolution, half of my whole family got murdered in China, and so fled to Taiwan and then here. So I'm a hawk of all hawks, and then my foundation also broke the story. If you remember the Chinese government buying land near the military bases, so like my policy foundation broke that story.
Wow.
So I was telling John that a bunch of like Chinese ambassadors blocked me on Twitter, and because I was like harping on it came from a lab, like sort of thing. But anyways, I think that the Americans like to think the world works as if Western kind of frameworks and philosophy. And a lot of, if you like the history of Chinese and the way that they have accelerated their innovation curve, which is, by the way, we sort of treat that in post-Nixon era kind of frameworks as like how we got schooled. the pattern of China has always been to steal technology from other people. And so if you look at even how they got the first nuclear weapon, so the way that they got that, and this is just a quick side story because I think it's helpful for the West to understand just how they work. So if you remember, Eisenhower was asked, would we ever use a nuclear weapon against China to defend Taiwan? And that actually whole story was planted by the Chinese because China was trying Mao at the time. Mao was so crazy that even Stalin was like, that dude is freaking nuts and he kills his own people at too much, right? It's like he goes way too far. And, I just do a couple million, he's doing tens of millions, right? So Stalin was like, absolutely not. We're never giving you nuclear weapons ever, right? Because you're crazy. And so the Chinese basically invented this narrative and story, planted it in DC, created this line within the State Department that they could invade Taiwan. And so then got to the media, and then Eisenhower was asked, and then it was posted, and he said, yes, we would use the nuclear weapon to defend Taiwan. So then what Mao does, he goes back to Stalin, and he goes, hey, do you want to have America on your borders? And Stalin goes, no, I don't want that, but I don't want to give you nukes. So what I'll do is I'll send Russian scientists to China to just co-develop a nuclear reactor with you, but just don't take my secrets, right? Then 5 years later, they have a nuclear weapon, right? So they've done that with nuclear submarines. They did that with fighter jets. They did that with SAMs. They did that with aircraft technology. So this is just like a long line of history of like how they kind of work as like a country. So, but when you're in an environment when they have 10 times the number of engineers as we do, they have a relatively centrally organized government that can execute big initiatives. But it's still a highly federalized government. So it's in the Shanghai province and Shanxi province. The governors kind of like all work separately, like in America. Like they're hyper federalized. But generally they come up with these like kind of big initiatives and big plans. And so when it comes to like GPUs, we have to realize that they are very much closer than we think. Like the reason why iPhones are built there is because it's so technically complex to build an iPhone that we can't do that anywhere else. It's not because it's cheap. The cheapest place to build things is Mexico, like just by labor hours. But Mexico doesn't have the technical capability of doing that. And so when we have the situation with GPUs, you have to understand that it's not just like we can actually protect this technology for that long. The actual moats around the information asymmetry that we have as a nation towards China on the advancement of chips is much smaller than we think. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like under 12 months. So if you think they're like 5 years away, I can be sympathetic to the exports controls, but if they're under a year, the goal is to win. The goal is to reach escape velocity like Oppenheimer mode, right? They brought everyone Los Alamos not to be secretive. It's because we had to win. We had to be first. Because whoever was first defined the entire era of what nuclear weapons became. And so that, and then we actually, by the way, cut off all of our allies too. We took the mathematicians from Britain. We said, hey, yeah, we'll share everything. And then we made the nuke and then we cut them off. And then they went to go build their own nuke. So it's kind of the same situation where building GPUs is actually much easier than the U.S. government thinks, which is why Amazon's doing it, Microsoft's doing it, Facebook's doing it, Broadcom's now a $1 trillion company. And the second is that their actual ability on the foundry side is more like a year or two behind. Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, it becomes where we need to distribute our technology like a Boeing asset to as many places in the world that wants to take it. Because then that becomes our footprint that we control, that we can continually express and influence that other country. Otherwise, Huawei is going to show up and is going to be like, hey, my thing is like, 80% is good, but it's cheap. And I'm not going to cut you off from the most important technology wave in the next 10, 15 years. And that's a pretty compelling argument if you think that you're another country. And so that's why I think this reorientation has to happen around where we actually are as a country in terms of how far we are ahead. But also we can take advantage of that because the stuff is like quite easy to deploy compared to like CPU infrastructure, and as well as the world wants it. And the most recent controls are a little bit dishonest because if you go look at the January 15 ruling, it adds Greenland and Portugal and Poland and Finland, and it adds Greece, and it adds basically everywhere in the world but 19 countries. So do we really think that Greenland is going to diffuse GPUs to China? No, it's because they have cheap power, right? Mm. So it's turned into this like protectionism thing where we're like, we have to protect our companies. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I thought this was about China. Like, so now we're like doing this to like protect and like isolate. And so one reason why we have lost the LLM race on the open source side is because we've done stuff like that. And I think that's putting us again another disadvantage about another advantage for Huawei, because Huawei can be like, hey, I had the leading open source models, China does, it's unquestionable, and now I have a chip that's designed for it. So like we're putting ourselves in kind of a really difficult position, and also a difficult position for NVIDIA, because the reality is like this is the goal where we have to achieve escape velocity first, like with the nuclear weapon. Not like we can hold off this wall and like play these games with countries and just slow them down. In reality, it's like we just need to win. We need to stop like messing around and trying to do these kind of stupid games.
Can you give a hyper abridged version of your version of AI 2027? Like, what does hitting escape velocity look like? Kind of like a potentially like a white pill.
Look like?
What does winning look like?
I think America should have the largest GPU cluster in the world as a deterrent. That's what I mean by the nuke button. And that's a game of deregulating energy. They're kind of like the other things that I think are more widely accepted. Like to me, it's all energy should be acceptable. We can build on federal land. All that stuff's great. And we actually need to reshore semis. But I think the way you reshore semis is not randomly tariffing stuff and then providing exemptions when you have a lobbyist that is convincing enough to go to the White House. I thought we were supposed to be opposed to that as but it's not now. So we should focus on deregulation and then subsidizing actual development here. So then giving tax breaks for people to use the Intel Foundry or TSMC's Foundry to like reshore. So I think it's building largest GPU clusters in the world. I think it's being the production house for all advanced semiconductor work. But then also having so the way I would use that is like a new Monroe Doctrine, that America is not going to rebuild the supply chain for fans and servers or fiber optic cables or anything like that. Like all that stuff, even that is not in China because China is too expensive to build there. So that's why they put it in Thailand and Malaysia and these other countries. But we can put that in like in Mexico. We can put that maybe, we're outsourcing prisoners to El Salvador. Maybe we see if they can build fiber optic cables too. So like we can have a new Monroe Doctrine of like reshoring everything within this hemisphere. And I think that's more of like a reasonable and also quite more achievable task than just saying everything has to come back into America. And then the next part relates to open source, where we have to just get better at this. And we haven't gotten better, I believe, because of protectionist measures that were mostly secondary effects. I don't think they were primary operant for that. I think it's just kind of more of a secondary outcome. But that's going to be how this space wins. It's going to be a myriad of models being used for wide different purposes, models that are highly specialized, and then kind of a separation between like platform as service companies to help you run models and then the infrastructure. And so the infrastructure part we can actually win at because we're generally like good at energy, but we're not good at power, if that makes sense. Like we're really good at like finding stuff and exploiting it out of the ground or building different types of energy frameworks. We're not really good at power. And I think that's where the rest of the world
and power you're defining as like converting that energy source into basically transferring that energy into chips, right? And like into the actual cluster effectively.
Because you think that like power in our country is deregulated, mostly deregulated. Say it's highly federalized. So just because the federal government says you should build power plants doesn't mean Virginia is going to do it, right? And that's designed to protect our rights as a nation. It's designed to protect the rights of a state. That the state ultimately is in charge of these things and has. There's the reason why anything that's not enumerated in the Constitution is given to the states. It's because the enumerated powers is designed to protect the states from big actions down as a do all these things. And that's what's created actually a very stable political environment. And I do think I'm opposed to tariffs in general, but I think people are kind of overreacting. They think that this is the end of the world and everything's going to be done. I was like, if America is that fragile, like a lot of bad stuff is going to happen either way, because it's just not going to be one person that's going to take down our system because and I voted for Trump, and I don't believe that just from an ideological perspective, but also just the nature of our country. If you look at the history of our country, it's been through worse and it has survived because of the system and our ethos that we've built. So when it comes to like this situation, I think it's I'll butcher a quote because he's way better at it than me. But there was a prime minister in England who used to say that that America is not good primary actor, but an excellent secondary actor. It wins secondary, never wins primary. And it's because we don't generally rise to the task that's in front of us. We kind of like go play around on Netflix and kind of like mess around for a while and like spend money on energy that doesn't work and kind of basically BSing. And then all of a sudden something happens. And then we're like, we gotta go to the gym, we have to win, and we're gonna win, we're gonna be freaking ruthless, right? And then we like show up, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of the world's like, hey, pay attention, pay attention. And we're like, why? Like there's a new episode of Love on the Spectrum. So that's what it should, like
Yeah.
and so I think that's what's
Well, I
happening
think
with
the
AI.
interesting
It's like,
interesting thing right now is and I'd be curious to get your take here. We had Jordan from China talk on just earlier, and I was asking him, I was like, do the Chinese laugh at us that we don't ban TikTok and DJI and Unitree and all these companies that are just obvious national security threats that like you could just end, and it would be controversial, but it's hard to argue. It's genuinely hard to argue in favor of allowing these companies to operate here when they wouldn't allow the same companies to operate. I want to kind of unpack something. One thing, my sense is that you have a much greater fear of a U.S. adversary like China with superintelligence, with the biggest cluster in the world, than superintelligence by itself, right? So like, is it true that your sort of like P-doom involves China winning the AI race and then using that to exert power and influence over us and the rest of the world?
it's more of a it's more of like losing soft power and relevancy. I think of it as a let's think maybe like a metaphor to help. So let's think about airplanes. So Boeing is a national security asset, right? It exists at the pleasure of the U.S. government, right? And so it's not, obviously we don't own it, right? But it's clearly something happened, we would do something. So same with like SWIFT, right? Same with the U.S. dollar. That's why the bond stuff is the most concerning out of the tariff drama, is the behavior on long-term bonds. Basically, the U.S. liquidity is declining, which is like a very scary kind of thing because we are the default reserve currency and being pegged to the dollar. And so the social influence is what creates wealth for America. That being the policeman of the world doesn't mean just like where y'all live and where I live, the police aren't here in my house right now. But it's the fact of like they run it. And when we run the free world, everyone gets wealthier, we get more powerful and more meaningful, and we can continue to bring people out of poverty, introduce human rights, all these like great things that I think God has chosen America to be the representation of to the world. And so I view more like China is not a kinetic country, and it has kinetic abilities, totally true. But the most meaningful war that China's ever fought is the Indo-China War. It was a couple thousand people. That's it in the history of their country. And they've done proxies. That's true. Not at the scale of Iran, but obviously North Korea is the biggest proxy, and they played a little bit in Southeast Asia. But they're pretty racist as a country, so they don't really consider all the Asians equal. So it's just more who's on the border. Like China is mostly CCP. Is mostly interested in preservation and insulation. Like that's what they're interested in. And so because we express a mimetic desire to be expansionist, because fundamentally the Western philosophy is expansionist, because it's based on Judeo-Christian frameworks about being evangelical and being free orientation. I think it's also the way humans are designed to be freely in commerce with each other. That presents an adversarial view to China. But fundamentally, China, I will give you another very, very specific example too. Like the number of amphibian shipping vessels to actually take people from mainland to Taiwan, they have around 20 or 30. They're actually capable of crossing that. So if they're planning on invading, you don't do 20 or 30, right? And the number of military you need is it's actually an equation the Pentagon.
Hasn't Palmer talked about,
yes, even commercial ships are
ships
outfitted to serve the purpose of an invasion?
But again, that's asymmetric. So like China thinks asymmetrically. They don't think, they think in the manner of, how do I get something to happen towards my favor without ever having to fight a bullet? That has been their entire foreign policy since existing. Like the Stalin example, how they got submarines, how they got fifth-gen fighters, like how they actually infiltrate Silicon Valley. Like they're everywhere in Silicon Valley. Like, that's totally true. They've taken RP. Was that asymmetric or was that symmetric? Asymmetric. So that's the way they think about the world. And so, for example, like Xi took out Hu Jintao, right, publicly. Why? It's because the way that CCP works is like when it's confronted with a significant adversarial problem, like outside of the country, what typically happens is they replace the president or the premier. And so Hu Jintao was the most logical person to actually come and replace Xi. So he sidelined. If you look at also there are some all of a sudden there's a bunch of people in the Central Committee and the Standing Committee that have disappeared now. They have gone somewhere. It's because if the history of the CCP is that when it's confronted with a challenge like Tiananmen Square, someone all of a sudden that person just disappears. They get sidelined in the Standing Committee. And that is the pattern of how the actual, because it's interested in the preservation of its party. Does a war increase the likelihood of preservation or decrease like it decreases? Like every war does that. So because you know who's going to win. So they'd rather play asymmetrically because it's more of an assurance that they are going to win because we as a country are not very good at that. Asymmetric takes advantage of our Western ideas. So I don't disregard that.
How do you think about American soft power in the context of, you know, the two highest profile consumer AI products that I think are top of mind right now are Manus, and I'm saying that in a very American sound, Manus, and Manus,
DeepSeek,
and DeepSeek,
DeepSeek.
And you know, we had Tyler Cowen on the show yesterday, and he was basically saying, you know, these companies are basically trained on Western models, and by nature of that, the sort of Western thought is baked into them, and that's some form of soft power for the West.
But I just don't want to go back to the Boeing example. I don't want France to have Huawei gear. I want it to be NVIDIA gear because that's an expression of America. So that's what I want. Yeah. And that's the mitigation thing of like if we allow them to continue to asymmetrically take over the world through a new Belt and Road Initiative. The first one failed because they couldn't actually fund it as a society, and the delivery of the products was actually pretty bad. You
mean like roads that are, you know, basically cracked in half, and like dams that don't work, and
belts that would fall apart when you try to pull up your pants.
And it's everywhere in Africa. If you talk to I've been to Africa, you can see some stuff behind me from Africa. Like you talk to them, there's cars there with Chinese letters and stuff, and everyone in Africa says it's garbage stuff that they had to fix locally. So it just was a failed experiment. But they're generally very good at this kind of focused manufacturing to export to create asymmetric influence. That's their goal. And I'm more interested in how that sort of as it relates to AI. How a footprint of Huawei, similar as we responded with ZTE, how that would negatively impact our ability to influence foreign policy in Europe or in South America or Africa. Like that's more of my concern, not that they're going to invade Taiwan. I just think that that's like a very American Western way of looking at the situation when the Pentagon says that it would take the entire People's Republic Army to take like the entire, not 80%, 120%, including reserve, to run Taiwan if they actually invade it. Or would it be easier just to have a Manchurian candidate? Manchurian candidate, like flood the airways with like fake AI, you know, stuff into Taiwan and try to flip a party. There is an entire party dedicated to closer relationships in Taiwan, in the Taiwan parliament. So why would they invade? Like it's just an American way of responding, because that's how we respond when like someone's like, hey, they punch us. We're like, hey, we're on the freaking launch missiles from a frigate and like destroy your country. Right? That's like the way we think about the world. It doesn't mean that like I'm a hawk on China. It just like, what is the enemy? And I think we are appealing to the enemy, but these export controls and regulating AI, trying to do these proliferation diffusion rules, treating AI as if it's a weapon and regulating as such, that enables the Manus and the DeepSeek to be prolific, right? So that's why we're not doing open sources, because all these like regulation stuff is happening in the West. And China's like, whatever, we'll just diffuse the model and everyone go to town, right? We won the internet because we were free and open. China's winning AI because it's free and open, not because they care about that. It's
Mark
because
Zuckerberg,
we're
like a word, he's trying with Llama 4. It's been a mixed reaction, but he is trying.
Mixed.
What? Can you talk about, something I find fascinating is the companies that feel extremely significant right now to U.S. national security, Huawei, the TikToks, Unitree, DJI, they're all private, right? And I'm assuming that that's like, there's various reasons you'd want to be private. One is they can access plenty of capital, but another obvious reason is that if you don't, all your metrics can be made up. You can be doing all these things. You can be taking all the state funding, right? Like you can just basically directly serve the state in a way that it just becomes much harder. Do you expect companies, not financial advice or anything like that, but do you expect companies like, Huawei and DJI and Unitree, all these critical companies to just stay private forever?
Sure. I mean, I think of it as, again, going back to like China is such a massive country, it's very federalized. So think of it as the Chinese people are very different than CCP, clearly. And so when China has something that's very successful, like a DeepSeek phenomena, what happens is that the CCP co-ops it. But everything up to that point is China, like the Chinese people. Because we speaking for my dad, it's Chinese, they're very industrious, they're very driven people. It's just part of the mindset. But also you're very skeptical. It's a very actually low trust society, similar to like India and some other Asian countries. And so my dad's in CDs. He doesn't like the stock market. He doesn't trust banks and stuff like that. It's just kind of like his natural framework of the world.
Wired.
And yeah. And so but the desire to be industrious is it's innate to the kind of orientation around what it means to have a Chinese philosophy. And so when CCP adopts stuff like that, it's like to get to the next level as a company, you have to join the communist state apparatus. And so everyone who's like a big company is co-opted in. But to say that, and this is where it's different than like Leninist style communism, is they're Mao adopted, I 100% opposed communism, but you got to be fair about what actually happened. Like Mao took that as an authoritarian concept and just pressed it down on the people. It's not they're not purists in any sense. They're almost like a bit like rationalists, because they want to be powerful and they want to stay in power. So if the ideology has to change, it will change.
Yeah.
And so that's where they let many of these successful companies in China that are, okay, as the New York Times says, flooding the European markets with cheap goods now. It's like they're flooding our markets with cheap goods. Many of those are done by just Chinese entrepreneurs. It's just no state interaction. But anything that's extenuating beyond the state and a meaningful national security, like an industry that is really national security, like the CCP is utterly in control of that. But you have to understand the etiology, where it came from, then understand the teleological framework of where they want to go with it, rather than treating it as if, I personally don't believe, for example, that China is interested in spreading communism, and they don't have a Comintern like Soviet Union did to spread communism. They're interested in preservation, and so that is not a type of a country where you're that they're going to go to war at any chance they get. In fact, they're very hesitant. They're very hesitant to war. And if you read a book about a history about China, there's a common pattern in the history of China, which is self-implosion. They've done it 4 times. So they also know that too. It just ends up being where then it all kind of falls apart, right? And I love a book by Rodney Stark. He said that China invented gunpowder at the same time as Europe did, and China put it in fireworks to scare off ghosts. And Europeans put it in a barrel to shoot a bullet. Yeah. Right. And so that it tells you very industrious, very, driven in terms of ethos, but it doesn't always land a plane. And that's what I'm leaning into is Huawei will make something cheap. We'll make something alternative to NVIDIA, but let's not give them the rope where they're America's opposed to proliferation. It's opposed to exports. It's opposed to open source. It's you're giving them all the fuel to be come to China, we'll give you AI, even though it's not as good.
Yeah, that idea of mimetic rivalry in geopolitics is fascinating to me because I don't know if you've read Wang Huning's America Against America, but it was this book that basically they sent an emissary to the United States. He looks around and he determines that America will implode, and it's clearly their own anxieties about implosion writ onto the American story. But America is undefeated and we're not going to implode. It's the last thing that will happen.
I think it's closest thing to heaven. It's great. It's an awesome, My family loves being here, and it has been an immense blessing. My grandpa came here with nothing.
Well,
And
this
ended up being
interview has
multimillionaire.
also been the closest thing to heaven. It's been
I
fantastic.
have a
having you.
couple.
Another question?
Do you have a hard stop?
Do you have a hard stop? You want to keep
No,
going?
no, I don't. Yeah.
Okay, let's keep
I got
chatting.
a couple
happy.
more questions.
Let's do
One, what does having the largest cluster, right? This like
Yeah.
supercomputer, super weapon, in some ways, what does that actually look like in practice? Is it run by who sort of operates it? Is it a network of clusters? What does that actually look like in your view?
Yeah, I would say be run by Department of Energy, a combination of NIST, be deployed in a place that's undisclosed, and it's used as mostly as training in our own side, as in our own military, on like advancing their own capabilities of understanding what LLMs can do, understanding like how compute can work at scale. Because like LLMs are again super cool, we all use them every day, but it's really the parallelized computing that it changes the way which warfare works. And that when you have the ability to scale that amount of computing power at a single moment, it makes all types of, which mostly is targeted towards asymmetric sort of attacks on us. We have to be able to understand like what that actually means at that scale. And so it's not Stargate that's clearly for OpenAI. It's not like the DoD sec should like email Sam like, hey, can I borrow this for like it has to be something that we own, we control, that is part of the people's power. And the point of that also is a deterrent, saying that people will do something bad with AI that is inescapable. It's part of the fallen nature of humanity that we take great things and we apply maladaptive adjustments to it, and so we have to just be prepared for that. And what that attack means, I don't think we fully understand yet. We have theories around it, but I believe that it's going to be some form of attack on our infrastructure that's not designed to handle this form of sort of computing power targeted at us. So it's mostly being used as a deterrent, and also kind of show our footprint as in like we are going to be the best at this, and taking a small slice of the how the budget can be $5 trillion, just to like say that we're investing
Didn't
this
the
as a country.
F-35 cost about $1 trillion?
$1 trillion investment by the United States. A lot less to copy it, actually. Turns out when you can write off all the R&D costs, it's actually a pretty great plane.
Yeah, and so that's saying it's like you lean into going back to the bad Mises thing, and I know you like Gerard.
Yeah.
So like it's like we just lean into so much of like what China's really good at. Like why are we shocked that deep sea captain? Like literally, like how look at Timu Xin, look at like
they're great at going one to many. That's what China does best.
Yeah, so like we have to do
it's actually
what we're really good at, right?
$2 trillion.
$2 trillion. Wow, geez.
I guess on this, one question I have is, again, because this conversation is top of mind, but Tyler Cowen yesterday was very excited about AGI coming in the next couple days. We don't know exactly what he meant.
Fastest timeline possible.
Fastest timeline.
Extremely
AGI.
Well, it's a social network.
But
OpenAI is launching a social network.
Yeah, that
Maybe
might be
AGI.
it. But I want to, like this conversation's been tremendously fascinating. I'd love to get sort of your personal definition, how you look at AGI, and then what your timelines look like around it.
So I can answer this differently, but I think it's more honest. Is that if you don't know what you're looking for from a prima facie perspective, you don't know how to measure it. So how do you measure if someone's intelligent? Is it SAT? Is it do they make money? Is it that they're wise?
Crack jokes.
Is it good people? The funny, right? And I think that's where the AGI problem hits a wall, which is like, what am I even measuring against? Like when it happens, when every single one of those tests, which are by the way just randomly picked out of a hat, and an LLM 100% across, and it still doesn't fully work. What do we do, right? And that's the fundamental anthropomorphic question, which is a metaphysical question of like, this is why it's so fun. I have a background in philosophy and theology. It's like, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to actually represent intelligence? And many people who push ASI, AGI they have a very piss poor understanding. Like they didn't read Locke. They don't know who Descartes is. They don't. Rousseau is a stranger. Like they've read some Nietzsche because it's cool in high school, but there's very little understanding about the longevity and the history of what we have valued as a just a social creature and the evolution of our culture to say like what is meaning and purpose and intelligence and even the epistemology of there's a difference between information, data, numbers, and knowledge. Like all those from epistemological perspective are completely different things, right? Like knowledge is the discrimination of information. Data is the series of numbers. And if you look at people pushing AGI and ASI, they typically one have a very low view of humanity. Like their anthropology is like we're robots, we're a reductionist thing, like we're all biology, and which is like kind of been rejected since the new atheists have fallen aside. And they kind of have all those presuppositions built into it. Versus a person like me, who's like I'm an evangelical Christian, like I don't have that view of humans. I think that there is an immaterial part of our nature. Numbers are immaterial. Data is numbers. Like it's pretty logical to believe that like we are ourselves an immaterial. There's something about it. Therefore, I can't actually put it in bits and bytes. So AGI and ASI, I think, is a trope to kind of make an interesting marketing angle. Again,
the other thing is, it's marketing, and there's conflicts, and it's hard to find somebody that works in AI, that obviously is intelligent on, however you want to look at it, that doesn't have at least a $10 million, position riding on
Bags.
the AGI marketing, like this sort of like, it's almost here, like it's coming type of thing. And so that's why I was,
it's not. Like I just don't believe. It doesn't mean it's not going to be valuable. That's the confusion.
Yeah.
Is that if you create this trope, this red herring that's not going to be there, you then false flag, build a bubble, and it's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
I think LLMs is as Founders Fund would say, is that I have a Star Wars view of the world, not a Star Trek view of the world, and that technology is a positive adaptation of the human capability to extend its arm further, and it only helps humans become more human things. And so a lot of the AGI ASI talk it's really built on presuppositions of a negative view, a negative anthropology that is not only been disproven over and over again philosophically and theologically, but it just doesn't bear itself in the science. Like the mind itself is, as an example, you can go back in the 80s and 70s and 50s, they were like, the mind is this, we have fully discovered what the mind is. And then 10 years later, it's like, we don't know what the mind is. Like it continues to expand. And I think that relates to, unless you can actually pinpoint and understand what intelligence is on the anthropology side, you're not going to be able to ever measure AGI or have an ASI.
Interesting. Anything else, Jordy?
Oh, I'd love to keep going for
great.
another hour,
Well, I mean,
but
we
we'll
can
have you back on again
Yeah,
soon.
that's the beauty of
This
the
was
show.
great.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can go way deeper.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
This
this
is
was
great.
really fun. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Aaron. Thanks
Cheers.
so much.
Yeah. God bless, guys. Bye.
That's great. Well, let's rip through some timeline. This might
John's
be a
favorite.
world record for number of size gongs this show. Let's hear the
Activate golden retriever mode.
not quite size gong, but close. There's some good sound
what we
effects. The
needed.
soundboard's back in business, folks.
Brought to you by our very own Ben. Ben
Yes.
personally recorded these sound effects.
It is his voice.
It's his voice.
Founder mode.
Well, speaking of founder mode, Sam Altman was in founders mode yesterday when founder mode yesterday when it broke that OpenAI is exploring a social network arena with AI features. Can't imagine it's probably going to be absolutely flooded with Studio Ghibli pictures. But what is your take on the OpenAI social network? Will you be they're trying to rival Elon Musk's X, The Verge reports. And on one hand, makes a ton of sense to get more distribution, more time in the app, means more use of the LLM.
I understand Sam and the OpenAI team wanting network effects. I feel it feels potentially like a huge distraction to try to go compete in consumer social, which we've just seen time and time again. Yes, they have massive distribution. They're on the home screen of hundreds of millions of people. They have, in the same. The wild thing is, I don't know how many X weekly active users are there.
I think it's actually around the same size, like 500 million or something like that.
So X has the same advantage in terms of launching a foundation model. consumer app as in many ways as OpenAI does, building a social network. I just think it's LLMs seem to be more intuitive to build because you have this sort of black box, the model, and then you have this like easy interface on top, versus a social network, which is like, how are you going to seed it, right? Seeding it with 500 million weekly actives from.
Look at the lesson of Google Circles. Like Google had 1 billion people using Google every single day to search for things. People did not necessarily want to share their search results into Google Circles. It was this Facebook copycat. It never took off. And Google had every advantage in that race against Facebook when they launched that product, I think in 2010. The flip side is I know a lot of people that run great deep research reports. I would probably follow Tyler Cowen on the OpenAI social network. And when he finds a really great deep research report, he's spent 10 minutes waiting for that to come back, and he's put out a deep research report. If he were able to, with one click, make this one public, this is an interesting finding. Or some of the OpenAI friends we talked to who said that they do deep research reports on just what towels I should buy. All right. That was one of the examples. Or what refrigerator should I buy? Instead of needing to wait the 10 minutes, it's already in my feed. And it's also this curation and discovery of I'm scrolling and I see Aiden posts, hey, there's this deep research report on washing machines. I might just click into that.
I like the idea of building a social feed into the existing product, because I would love to, if you have the opportunity to prompt something, find something interesting, share it to a feed. That's very interesting. I don't like the idea of trying to then build this sort of competing social network with its own,
I agree,
like new, are we sharing? What are we sharing there? Is it if it's funny, if it's a social feed built on top of the app? That again, like
that feels odd. But at the same time, like right now, the flow is you go into OpenAI, ChatGPT, you figure out that Studio Ghibli style is a great prompt for any image you upload, and then you screenshot that and post it on X and say, here's the prompt. Midjourney kind of hacked that by creating the Discord, so you can see what other people in the Midjourney Discord are prompting. You can copy paste it, change one word. All of a sudden it's a cyberpunk dog instead of a cyberpunk cat. And that gets you started on the flow of prompting Midjourney. I could see that being kind of interesting. But it'll be very interesting on how this actually gets integrated. But there's already a share button on every ChatGPT chat interaction, and I do share them with people sometimes. Hey, I for the show, I turn this into some bullet points, share it with you. You can go right in. You could continue prompting. I think that there's something there. But it could also
going and purely just trying to beat Elon Musk because you're annoyed that he's suing you. Seems like
it could just be like a shot across the bow.
Hopefully there's something deeper there, because I actually think it's much easier for X to build an LLM and chatbot than it is for OpenAI to build a thriving independent social network.
And even though they have the app installed everywhere, there is a set amount of time on an app. There's only a set amount of screen real estate for a button. Elon in the X app puts the Grok button down at the bottom by default, but there's only really 6 slots for there. So if you're putting that Grok button there, that you're taking away from a different feed or messages or notifications, other stuff, there's trade-offs here. It could also just turn into an Instagram clone, where people are just sharing endless Studio Ghiblis, ultimately just flexing on each other. And the best way to flex is with a Patek Philippe Nautilus that's from Bezel. Go to getbezel.com. Look at this.
Boom.
With the Tiffany dial on the Nautilus. You take a picture of that. Yeah, you buy a Patek, you throw it through Studio Ghibli filter. It's no longer cringe. You're no longer flexing. You throw it on the OpenAI social network.
That's brother behavior.
It's brother behavior. Go to getbezel.com. Anyway,
Just do it.
Notion Mail, similar AI company launching a social network. Now Notion's launching an email service.
We got project management launching email.
We've been talking about this. I was saying I want someone to build a new email client from the ground up with AI at the forefront of that, because I've been very dissatisfied with the Gemini experience in Gmail. Even just my Gmail experience, I have like 4 different inboxes now. It's not really filtering stuff.
Notion was super quick to launch integrate LLMs within the product,
which makes a ton of sense on the core product. But then I think that they might be in enough of a founder mode, enough capital and engineering to actually roll this out and make this great. So I will definitely be trying this when it becomes generally available. It might be generally available now.
Yeah, and it's an interesting concept. So in the marketing launch email, it says the inbox that thinks like you. One fascinating thing about Notion is if you're actively using it for project management, life management, business, it has so much context on everything in your life, right? It has
that's the scary
it
thing to
has,
me, because like if Google catches up, I have way more data stuffed in Google in Sheets and Docs and Drive, and I don't want to port everything over to Notion because I'm not
Notion
a Notion
potentially
daily user.
is a better data source
if you're a Notion user.
If you're a core Notion user.
Totally.
So it's
totally.
an extending
100%. If you're a builder, I know people that build their whole life on Notion. They have different workflows for every single project. They're all in on Notion. This is going to be a fantastic experience for them. For me, I'm kind of stuck because I'm like locked into Google's ecosystem. I want them to catch up.
Yeah.
They're not really doing it.
Well, Notion's tool is integrated into
Gmail right now.
With Gmail.
Yeah. So it sits on top of that at least. But I would love to just be able to have my email be processed for me while I'm sleeping on my 8Sleep. So go to 8sleep.com/TBPN, 5-year warranty, 30-night risk-free trial, free returns, free shipping. I hope I did well because I think I dialed it in. I got to bed early.
I had a brutal night.
99. Let's go.
There we
99.
go.
I figured out the routine. I dial it in. I was like, I'm falling asleep within 30 minutes of the average of the last 3 days. The rolling average, that's their algorithm. 7.5 hours of sleep. Autopilot cooked. I felt great. I feel great today. Nothing like going into a 3-hour show with a 99 on the 8Sleep score. So go get an
big numbers. Go do it.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our deep dive on China. If you're looking to follow more of the breaking news with China, please go to Polymarket. They have a bunch of great markets about what's going on with the Chinese economy, what's going on geopolitically, what's going on with tariffs. You can check it all out at polymarket.com. Anyway, you have to do 2 pilgrimages in your 20s, going to Japan, going to Switzerland. Neither of those I did in my 20s. But what do you think? Are those worthwhile pilgrimages? Have you been to Japan?
I've not been to Japan.
Never been to Japan.
But I'm still in my 20s.
But you were in Switzerland like 4 months ago.
I have been to Switzerland a bunch. Mm-hmm. It's my favorite country that's not the U.S.
Yeah.
By a long shot.
It's great.
It's a perfect country.
Yeah. Well,
it really is.
Maybe we'll
it feels
have to go
like
to
being
Japan.
the entire country feels like being on a
world tour.
golf cart. Golf course.
Yeah. Well, Sam Ross sharing some big news from Numeral Tax. Q1 was a big year. Was a big one here.
Boom.
Big in
Get
terms
the
of
size
revenue,
gong ready.
customers, filings, our team, and of course, pieces of mail received by our virtual inboxes. Here are just a few of the highlights. They 3x their number of customers in Q1 versus Q1 last year. The sales team is crushing quota. They hired 22 new numerals, which is what they call themselves.
Numerals.
They opened a new HQ in SF. They announced the Series A by Benchmark, and they rolled the dice at Shop Talk, and they sponsored the world's #1 show, TBPN. Thank you for sponsoring us, Numeral.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And if you
guys, Numeral,
if you have sales tax, put it on autopilot. Head over to Numeral HQ. Spend less than 5 minutes per month on sales tax compliance.
Just do it.
Just do it. This was a funny post by Sam Altman. He says, BU, work in HFT, shaving nanoseconds off latency or extracting bips from models, have existential dread. See this tweet, wonder if your skills could be better used making AGI, apply to attend this party, meet the OpenAI team, build AGI. And so he's trying to recruit high-frequency traders. Maybe he saw what happened with DeepSeek because they were a bunch of high-frequency guys, right? A bunch of quants. Said, hey, time to optimize the models. Let's get our inference costs down. And now he's going to try and pull some people from Jane Street. Jane Street has a monopoly on Dwarkesh Patel ads, apparently, but not for long. Sam's got to buy some. He's got to pay up, get Dwarkesh to start running some job ads because it's one of the few shows I've ever seen Jane Street advertise on, but it's it's working pretty well, I guess. But this is interesting that the next challenge in AI will be, these inference optimizations. The GPUs are melting. We've heard this. The products are growing. They have the product developers. They're in San Francisco. I'm sure they're pulling in plenty of those people. And
if you love OpenAI, just take a breather on Ghibli photos. Mm-hmm. We know you're still doing them. Take a 2-day break.
Take a 2-day break.
Get some breathing room.
Go rent a wander.
Till they can get some.
Find your happy place.
Find your happy place. Find your happy place. Find your happy place.
Book a wander with inspiring views, hotel grade
Overnight
amenities,
success.
dreamy beds, top tier cleaning, and 24/7 concierge service. It's a vacation home, but better.
Wander
You-
really is an overnight success.
It is because when you go there,
when you stay there,
you spend the overnight and you become a success.
yes,
Yes,
and
Perfect.
every night is a success at Wander.
This
This stuff on Meta with the
Yeah.
FTC is just wild. So
bring us down.
Meta is in a battle with the FTC, and they basically are claiming we're indistinguishable from any other app, which Shield says is correct. And they pulls a document that they're
Photos.
using: TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts.
We can't have a monopoly. It's a
indistinguishable.
commodity.
Yeah.
We can't have a monopoly on oil.
Everybody's got a short form video feed.
Yep.
And it's true.
Convergence across
It's-
apps.
Yeah, just got there. Kind of mogging Snapchat by not
Didn't
even,
including them.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it really
they
has
included
been.
Snap and some other.
There's a best practice for building a social app now. I'm sure OpenAI has taken notes if they want to go this direction. Vertical videos, algorithmic feeds, likes, comments, shares, inboxes, and messages, and then you add long form, short form, monetization, comments, and show notes, and all these different stuff. And all these different competitors, TikTok, Instagram Reels, Shorts, they've all kind of done the best practice across everything. And the platforms have become pretty commoditized, which is one of the big reasons why people shouldn't be complaining about TikTok potentially going out of the App Store, because the TikTokers will be able to pop over to Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, go viral with the same content, and have a similarly sized business very quickly. So I think when you hear the stories of like businesses are built on TikTok, they will be destroyed. It's like realistically, most businesses are on all three.
It's taken us so
platforms,
long to ban
and they'll make and they'll move
that
over.
you had time to reduce platform dependency.
Yeah. But if you think they're going to win this case, if you think they're going to lose the case, why don't you go get some exposure on public.com to Meta stock, investing for those who take it seriously.
Not financial advice.
Not financial advice.
It's
I'm
just-
saying
John
you can
is
just
just
do whatever
demonstrating
you
that,
want.
that public is a platform with multi-asset investing,
Yes.
industry-leading yields, and
Yes.
there's millions of happy users.
Yes.
So,
But
get on over
speaking
there.
of investing, Kyle Harrison quote tweets, someone says, is backing competitive companies allowed now in venture? And shows what's going on at the foundation model level. Sequoia is in 4 foundation models.
Thinking Machines.
OpenAI, Thinking Machines, XAI, and SSI. Lightspeed's in 4. Index is in 2. Tiger's in 2. Co2's in 2. Andreessen's in 5.
4.
5.
Oh.
OpenAI, Thinking Machines, XAI, Mistral, and SSI. Wow.
It's a
Not
party.
just in one.
It's a party. We
It
got
is a party.
6-way party round for GTA 6.
It is odd. Like if the model layer's commoditizing, maybe you just want to buy all the commodities out. Buy all the oil companies, I guess. But maybe they wind up going different directions, and OpenAI becomes social network, and Thinking Machines becomes a, I don't know, like B2B SaaS company or something. Who knows? We'll
This
see.
next post is amazing from MKBHD.
Yep.
He is talking about nominative determinism, which we are big fans of on the show.
Love to see it spreading.
CEO of Nintendo America, Doug Bowser. Great name, strong name.
Bowser.
Fastest sprinter of all time, Usain Bolt. COO of Starbucks is Rosalind Brewer.
Yep.
World record chili pepper breeder is Ed Curry. CEO of Capital One Bank is Richard Fairbank. BBC weather meteorologist Sarah Blizzard.
Yep. Underrated is the nominative determinism that people kind of impose upon themselves. Like when I grew up, there was a weatherman named Dallas Raines, and he named his kids after cities. So it was like Austin Raines was his son, and I forget there was
That
another.
son is now the mayor of Austin.
Yeah, or
No,
weatherman,
I'm kidding.
or weatherman.
Fake news.
So you can keep your kids in the family business by giving them a name that will determine their future potentially. But nominative determinism, so much fun. Anyway, let's move on to Gavin Baker. He says, savage that former Meta AI researchers are explicitly noting on their resumes they had nothing to do with Llama 4. There's a member of technical staff over at OpenAI, joined February 2025 on reinforcement learning, frontier research, and post-training. And previously, this scientist was at Meta doing AI research and says that they were working on generative AI. Llama 2, Llama 3 have not been involved in Llama 4 at all. Interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of debate over like, is Llama 4 oversold? Is it really as bad as people say? But this is another data point of like, oh, maybe it's a little bit rough over there. But Zuck's in founder mode. I think he will figure
Don't
something
bet against
out.
him.
Don't bet against him. Let's go to Amy Wu. She says, founder secondaries at the Series A are becoming the norm again. We are back to 2021 fundraising heat.
Founder mode.
The funny thing is, like, I thought you were going to go size gong on that. Went with founder mode.
We actually don't have size going on.
Oh, we
here
don't.
yet.
We don't. Well, size gong for all the Series A secondaries that are happening.
No, I just think this is one of those things that's controversial, but never default bad.
Yeah.
I think it just comes down to sizing
depends on the company,
and
yeah.
traction.
Yep.
I don't think there's anything wrong with founders selling a few $100,000 of secondary.
I mean,
so
there are
that they
there are
can
plenty
just
of
sock it away.
founders,
It's not going to change how they approach the business. It doesn't. It's not like they're retiring. I think when we did in 2021. The secondaries that were happening were on another level where it was, a founder selling $50 to $200 million of secondary. And it's okay, that's like an extremely material exit.
Yep.
And they're going to, by default, be in a very different mindset after that point.
I mean, the CoreWeave guys sold, I think, like 100 million or more. I think like 8 or 9 figures of secondary before the IPO. CoreWeave's still trading at $40 a share. Like $18 billion company, like seems pretty stable. It hasn't sold off like crazy.
But it's John.
Am
My
I
dear
wrong?
John, it's down.
I thought it was up and then down. I went lifetime. CoreWeave.
Oh, okay.
Stock.
Sorry.
Yeah, right?
I was looking. Yeah.
No, it's down 7% today. It's not
priced.
having a good day, but if you look at the year, it priced at 40.
No.
It
I was
popped to
confused.
60, and then it's down at 40. Like it's like kind of in the trading range. It doesn't feel like
But
a
wasn't
SPAC
it
that's like,
it
oh,
was
it's down 80%.
originally meant to be priced at around
60. People were saying it was going to be a $30 billion company. It's a
Just never got
$19
out
billion
there.
company, but that doesn't sound. But that doesn't reek like, oh, the secondary like poisoned this. Like they're not taking it seriously. Like I don't know. At least not yet. We'll see what happens. I mean, the other thing is that like there are founders who are clearly doing their life's work. They're, years into building the business. It's very serious business, makes revenues, even maybe some profit. And they come out to do a Series A later. And then, there is some secondary, but for lifestyle reasons, maybe they have kids, maybe they need to buy a house. Like there's a bunch of different reasons why if you don't have a high salary, great credit as a founder, like you might need some secondary to pay for that. So mixed bag, all depends on the circumstance, but congratulations if you sold a bunch of secondary. Signal says every visual medium from concept art to fashion design to advertising to architecture is now downstream of text prompts. Remarkable. Yeah, it's true. This is just a good point.
Wife's been using ChatGPT to like imagine interior design stuff around the house. It's like, it's not perfect, but it's doing maybe 70% of what you would hire an interior designer to do in the early stages, right? Everything other than sourcing. Yeah.
Ryan Peterson sent me a meta poster, which was, he generated a Flexport poster ad for every single city that they operate in. So he had like 50 posters. That would be extremely complex to make. Then he put them all on one poster. So it's this big like poster that you can print out and show all of Flexport's like footprint. And then he just liked the prompt. So he made me one and he just sent me one for Lucy, which was really cool. And he was like, oh yeah, you can just print this out. Like don't go bigger than 18 by 24, but it'll look great. And I was like, thanks man. That's great. Very fun. Anyway, should we do the SBIR stuff that you were getting texts about? Big changes in the pipe for the SBIR STTR program. All Air Force topics in the current batch just got removed. So there was an email from DoD SBIR topic removals, and you had some extra context about this. Of course, SBIRs are the small business deals that happen pre-program of record for defense tech companies. You get a little bit of money from the DoD, but it's not a sustainable source of revenue, but it's a great way to fund the business in the short term, prove that there's at least some demand to get through the application.
I followed up with Adam. I'm going to butcher your last Walenkowski. Sorry, Adam. I was formerly at Anduril, NVIDIA, and Yale. He's now over at FID Labs. And he says, there are 4 major releases of cyber topics per year, and the second one for 2025 was due to begin accepting proposals next week. The 2 big agencies in that solicitation were Navy and Army. Navy and Air Force. Then the SBIR update email announced around 1 p.m. yesterday that all currently posted Air Force topics are being removed and no longer eligible for proposals. And that ends up being significant because in total that would have amounted to around $135 million of awards, which would have gone in some part to early stage defense tech founders. So, and there's also follow-on awards, so that could be another $200 million for awards that were canceled. So, anyways, there's reform happening around SBIR and just general changes the acquisition process. And so thank you to Adam for flagging this.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, we have Delian coming on the show Thursday. We have Sham Sankar from Palantir coming on the show Thursday, and I'm sure we'll stack a whole bunch of other interesting folks. So we should dig into that topic more on Thursday.
Let's do it.
But other than that, I think we're good to wrap up. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and listened to this show. We really appreciate you. We're having a lot of fun with this, and just trying to up the quality by just 5, 10, 100% every single day, compounding. It's just the most powerful force in the world.
It would not be possible without
our sponsors.
John has been very upfront. This is corporation.
Yes. This is corporate media.
So thank you to Ramp, Public, Polymarket, 8Sleep, Wander, Bezel, Numeral, and AdQuick. You guys are fantastic.
Yes.
And
go support them.
Go support them.
And we will
supporting the show.
see you tomorrow.
Looking forward to it. Cheers.
Bye.